So hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to So we are back with a brand new movie on what if Harry Potter was Artemis's secret son. But before we start, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Now let's begin the story. So let's begin Chattanooga Valley, Tennessee 1997. They say your first memory is often your greatest, but for Harry Potter, it was anything but. For as long as he could remember, he was always overlooked, forgotten, a nobody. No birthdays, no Christmas, nothing. All because one old man couldn't keep his ancient-ass mouth shut. He had to go and name one child as the savior instead of two as it really was. Two boys, Charles Sirius Potter and Harry James Potter. Both marked, one by wand, one by ceiling tile. Harry's memory of that night was of a wand being pointed in his face and then being struck by a green light, then nothing but darkness. Then being awoken to find Charles being paraded around by Albus Dumbledore as the boy who lived while Harry was known as the boy who was forgotten. His parents didn't forget his name or that he existed, they just forgot he was family for a time. So by the time Harry could walk and think on his own, he learned how to read and write with the help of the house elves. Math, science, English, even his magic came easy to him as they aided him daily. When he had time alone, he'd often watch Star Wars and imagined his magic being like the Force. He'd look inside of himself through meditation after searching the Potter library and finding books on occlumency, and then after finding his core and constantly meditating, he had cleared his mind, organizing it, setting traps and such. He'd later learned how to move objects wandlessly. But as he was studying world geography, he realized he wanted to know more than what Europe had to offer. For some time now, he had studied both sides of his family's history. Both were warriors of the sword and bow. So with his ever-growing magic, he was able to get a hold of one of his ancestors' bows and proceeded on his free time to practice archery. The elves secretly took the time to gather books for him to study fencing in order to learn the art of the blade as well as teaching him knife fighting. Getting a hold some paper that he transfigured into targets, he kept lengthening the distance every time his skill with the bow improved where he could hit a bullseye from 90 yards. He then had one of the house elves make about 3 things of quivers full of arrows as well as stocking up on survival equipment, hunting knives, a machete, pots and pans, utensils and produce seeds both mundane and magical. Even a few of his favorite plants when it came to herbology. So, taking a map of the world from a magical world atlas his mother just so happened to have, he placed it on a wall and transfiguring some darts from some paperclips in his father's office, which by the way transfiguring came easy to him due to who his mother was. Covering his eyes with one hand, he asked no one in particular, "What country does my fate lie in?" It landed on North America USA, enhancing the map to cover the states. His next question was, "What state does my fate lie in?" The dart landed on Chattanooga, Tennessee. Imagine that. He then gathered one of several of his family's magical tents his parents owned, seeing as they wouldn't likely miss it. When he had everything he needed hidden and stashed away with anti-summoning charms, he only waited for his parents and everyone else to give him a reason to leave. He was in his family's study one day when he heard his parents talking about not only giving his rightful inheritance to his brother, but they felt he would be bought off by creating a marriage certificate between House Potter and House Delacour of France with their firstborn daughter who was a Vila. They of course also spoke of how he would get a bit of money to his name with the marriage so they wouldn't let him think he was truly forgotten. Something even his godfather agreed with. Figuring that that was his cue, he decided it was time to leave, as he let them know that he heard their planning by coughing loud enough that it got their attention. When they turned their attention to him, he gave a look that basically said, "Like hell." This in of itself caused them to pale in horror of having been overheard. He then walked between and past James and Lily Potter, went to his room and proceeded to shut himself in for what would seem like the remainder of and wasn't heard from for the rest of the night. When his parents went to talk to him half an hour later, they would find 2 letters waiting for them on a clean, unmade bed in an empty room. One for them, and one for his supposed fiancée. Their letter basically told them how he wished them luck without him. That if he could survive without them for so long as he had been doing for some time, then he could and would continue to do so. Something that allowed Lily to reflect back on and realize he was right. He told them how he remembered that night quite well, and that even if they were to try and find him, he wouldn't come back. They had committed to Charles instead of both sons as it should have been, but they betrayed him. It would take an act of God or gods to make right what wrong they had done to him. To the Delacours, he informed them he wouldn't be tied down to someone he didn't love. That should he find his one and only true soulmate, he'd find her on his own terms. When he left, he hiked with his merchandise shrunk and about 500 galleons in his pocket, while in his letter, he let the Potters know of his taking what they never gave him and what he felt he was owed for all the years they neglected and forgot about him. Reaching out with his magic fully in his control, he summoned the magical night bus and was dropped off at some docks where he hid while under disillusionment on a cruise boat headed for the US. It took about a week to get there, so the whole time he was on board, he hid in such a way that no one would realize food was missing or kids' drinks and sodas went disappearing. Which leaves us to now. He was currently invisible with silencing and notice me not charms on himself, targeting his first kill after being in the woods for several days in the state of Tennessee with his eye on a big prize. A big white-tailed buck with excellent musculature. Plenty of meat to last a month or two under conservation charms. It was when the buck's ears pricked that he noticed something wasn't right. Apparating to the top of a big tree, he would notice what since his dinner had just taken off on him. He noticed several girls being chased by wolves. But these didn't look like ordinary wolves, nor did they look like werewolves. His uncle Mooney, who was his last and final link to Europe, had gone on to describe what his wolf form was like. The description of Mooney's wolf and these wolves were similar, but very different. Good thing he came prepared. Summoning a silver arrow to his hand, he aimed, took his time and released. The arrow struck true as it hit the lead wolf was ahead and yet was in the middle as it was hit from the front cranium, going on straight through. Both the girls and the wolves surrounding them were perplexed as one by one, from a different location, more arrows of silver were fired, their aims hitting true, but it was when Harry apparated to a weak branch that his luck ran out. Before he think a coherent thought, he fell. His fall came to an end all too soon as he hit something hard and curved. This something broke his disillusionment, silence, and notice me not charms as they dispelled, the illusion hiding him coming undone as he felt his good arm break right between the elbow and upper arm. Screaming in pain, he almost failed to notice as he was grabbed and hoisted by his neck by a wolf-like man who then held him against a tree and held him in the air, his feet dangling uselessly in the air. The leader of the wolves had a look that told Harry that he was gonna die. With his good arm the young Potter was able to get to his concealed hunting knife with this monstrosity's eyes focusing on his face. "If I'm gonna die, then you're coming with me, you filthy flea bag," he growled, bringing his knife from behind his back and using an upward curved slash, was able to partially blind the wolf-like man who grabbed his now bleeding face and yet also was howling in pain. But as the wolf man turned back after having been cut by what he now knew to be a silver knife, he then punched the boy wizard in the chest, causing him to fly straight into a tree with a loud crunch. Harry felt the air rush from his lungs as he sailed right into a tree and slid down after hearing the crunch of something breaking. He also knew he now had more than a broken arm. He couldn't move his body as it hurt too much, and a trail of blood was leaking from the back of his head. Already his vision was swirling and darkening. Lycaon, king of the wolves, had been cut by a mere male child for attacking the hunters of Artemis as he patted the freely bleeding cut and gazing at his blood. "It's been a long time since I've seen my own blood. Who was this child?" He smelled of power personified. He would make an excellent addition to his wolves, he thought to himself. He leaned down towards the boy's now exposed neck with teeth bared ready to infect the young soon-to-be pup. He failed to see the silver arrow that hit him between the eyes. As Lycaon dispersed into golden dust, Artemis, goddess of the hunt and the moon, came upon a scene that would change her life forever. A male child, one whom Artemis could sense powerful magic emanating from him, but it was also fading, and fading fast. Not seeing another choice, she turned to her hunters and without a word sent them back to camp while she lifted and teleported herself and her precious cargo to Mount Olympus. "Apollo, Apollo, I need you," she screamed, hoping he would hear her. "Hey sis, no need to shout," he said as he appeared. "Now whoa, what happened?" "This young mage saved some of my hunters and faced Lycaon himself. He's fading, and if you don't save him, he'll die." About an hour later, after Apollo took the child into his arms and teleported to his infirmary, Hecate, who had sensed one of her own in Mount Olympus, came upon a scene as several gods including Zeus and Lady Hera was outside Apollo's infirmary soothing a now distraught Artemis with blood on her hands. But whose blood? She thought absent-mindedly. A few seconds later, Apollo exited the room and gave them an assuring smile. "Apollo, how is the boy?" Zeus asked worriedly. "Well, He's stable, but not out of the woods yet. I healed what broken bones I could, but he's lost a lot of blood. Problem is, he's not just a wizard. He's a legacy of two of us. More importantly, he's a legacy of you and Hades' father." "What? Impossible. Who are his parents?" the stunned king of the gods asked. "I may be able to help there, Lord Zeus." Hecate spoke up. "I sensed one of my own and came as quick as I could. I can identify the boy." Nodding, they all followed Apollo into a room, where one look and Hecate gasped as she knew who this boy was. This was her new champion of magical Britain. Grasping her chest and her eyes tearing up, she rushed to the boy's side and pulled out a bottle of blood-replenishing potion and gently guided it down his throat, rubbing his said throat as to guide the potion into his stomach where it would do as it was titled to do, and restore what blood he lost. When she was done, she told the other gods and goddesses what the potion was and what it did. She then gently opened both of his eyes and very smoothly, gently, and delicately entered his mind to view his memories. Moments later she pulled out of his mind and made sure to double scan and check the boy's body, and when she saw how well Apollo did, she turned back to Zeus and the others with a look of utter contempt and loathing that they figured was not directed to them. "His name is Harry James Potter, son of James and Lily Potter, brother of Charles Sirius Potter." From there she described his life and all Harry had accomplished according to his memories, his connection to Zeus and Hades. To say the Lord of the Sky was pissed would be an understatement. Hera, on the other hand, was literally glowing with rage. She may have hated any spawn of her husband, but she cherished family above all. But Hestia, who had been watching from afar, decided to try and calm her sister and brother down. After they took a moment to calm themselves, seeing Zeus was causing serious lightning strikes all over the world which even Poseidon felt, they continued to try and think of something to aid the Potter child now resting in Thyr Kingdom's medical ward. "He won't be returning to those people. I won't have it. But he isn't a demigod either," Zeus said as he turned in thought, trying to find a way to help his and Hades' legacy child. "He could be adopted, since he has enough demigod blood in him that if you were to add another, he could and should become a demigod. Theoretically anyway," Lady Hecate said as a matter of fact. Looking at the assembled gods and goddesses before him, he then called on Hades, who was informed as was his right. Hades, like the others, was extremely angered, but the gods swore never to interfere in the mortal realm ever again. "Who will do it? Who will accept this honor of claiming Hades and I's legacy?" Zeus asked to all assembled. "Why not Artie here? She found him, and doesn't have a demigod of her own," Apollo stated aloud. Artemis was left gaping like a fish as all looked at her while her mouth kept opening and closing like a fish. Shocked as Apollo would think of such a thing, yet humbled, he thought she'd make a great mother. "The choice is yours, Artemis. No one will think less of you if you refuse," Zeus replied with compassion in his voice and eyes. Artemis looked down, weighing the pros and cons of the idea of having a male child as her own. After a moment, she looked back at said child and remembered he had saved her hunters when he could have easily walked away but didn't. After a moment's thought, and with a decision made, she looked back and said, "I'll do it." Determination in her heart. Question was, how would her hunters take this? July 31, 2001, New Martinsville, West Virginia. For 4 years he had spent his time among what he would affectionately call his new family. The hunters of Artemis were informed by Artemis herself that the young man who had nearly lost his life saving her hunters was in fact a legacy of Zeus and Hades, and that he was a young mage trying to escape the life his parents tried to commit him to. She then explained what had been happening within the magical world and how there were many wars and many lives lost because of men like Gellert Grindelwald and his protege, Tom Marvolo Riddle, or as he called himself, Lord Voldemort. The girls then figured out the man made an anagram of his own name. How an old manipulative wizard named Albus Dumbledore declared only two of the boys of House Potter as the boy who lived while the other was pushed into the shadows, only to be used to heighten his brother's fame and then pushed back into the shadows and forgotten again. She continued explaining how the house elves of House Potter raised him and eventually taught him until he could teach himself, even so much as to learn archery and sword fighting independently. He even taught himself how to access his magic after watching Star Wars, which she thought was funny. This brought a few giggles from the assembled girls as well. They were then asked to give their opinion on Artemis Blood adopting the young wizard and making him an official demigod and enhancing the demigod blood already flowing through his veins courtesy of Lord Zeus and Lord Hades. She asked them to be open and honest. There were a few disagreements from some, including Zoe and Phoebe, but even they had to admit the debt that Artemis and her sisters owed to this boy wizard. So it was unanimous that they would give him a chance. Artemis returned back to Mount Olympus and proceeded to tell Zeus and the others the news that her hunters would give Harry a chance and welcome him as a brother. She then proceeded to her brother's temple infirmary where he and Hecate watched Harry's vitals. They were steady and strong. She then asked if Harry could be awakened so she could talk to him. When Hecate did just that, he awoke with a groan. Ooh, did somebody catch the name of the werewolf who hit me? This caused Artemis, Apollo, and Hecate to chuckle loud enough to get Harry's attention. Looking to his left, he noticed the individuals in the same room with him. Where am I? Who are you? The god and goddesses then introduced themselves. Harry was skeptical at first, but when he gazed at Hecate, his magic jerked as if saying, "Watch it, she's the mistress of magic, you idiot." He always listened to his gut, so he did as his gut told him. He silenced himself. Hecate smirked knowing what he felt. She watched Harry as if on instinct as he got off the bed he was on and knelt before the assembled deities with one hand touching the floor in submission. "Rise, Harry Potter, rise." Hecate gently spoke. As he did, he felt he didn't deserve to look upon these powerful beings and so kept his head and eyes down. Apollo, being worried, asked, "Hey bud, how come you're looking down instead of up? Are we that hideous?" Artemis, watching the young wizard's body language, answered for Apollo, "No, it's not that, Apollo. It's because he feels as if he isn't worthy to look upon us. Right, Harry?" Without looking up or responding, he nodded slightly. "You don't have to feel like that, Harry." Hecate responded by softly touching his chin and raising it as his eyes came to gaze upon her as a single tear fell from one of his eyes. Something that softened the heart of the moon goddess as Harry launched himself into Hecate's arms, which she encircled around his head, trying to soothe the pain in the young man's heart. "It's okay," she whispered in his ear, running her fingers in his hair, feeling the pain and anguish within his damaged soul. "Let it out, Harry. No one blames you for what happened. You hear me? No one." A few moments had passed by, and when he was able to recompose himself, he was about to apologize to the goddess of magic when she waved him off. "Harry, Zeus and I came up with a plan, but before we explain it, Zeus and Hades themselves as well as the other gods and goddesses wish to see and meet with you within the throne room. Do you think you can handle that?" At first Harry was bewildered. This was the king of the gods she was talking about. To have an audience with Zeus and the other gods of Olympus was an honor in of itself. He was wide-eyed with disbelief. What would the king of Olympus want with him? He could only nod as Hecate grinned and sighed along, teleported them both to the throne room. Godly teleportation was a new experience, one that Harry liked better than apparition, whereas apparating felt like being squeezed and going through a tube. You didn't even feel anything when teleporting side by side with a god or goddess. Looking around at the seated gods and goddesses, Harry was gobsmacked just gazing at them. He had heard and read stories of the gods of Olympus, knew what their titles were, so gazing at each one, the way they were dressed and carried themselves as they sat, he was able to deduce who was which god or goddess. He then watched as Apollo and Artemis smiled slightly at him and grew to their true size and seated themselves in their own respective seats while Hecate stood at Harry's side as moral support. It was two separate gods that caught Harry's attention. Harry, for some reason or another, felt his blood calling to these two powerful beings before him. Stepping from his magical patron, he felt his feet betray him for a moment as he stepped before his grandfathers of times past. Not that he knew that, of course. Kneeling before them and lowering his head, a deep baritone voice that Harry felt more than he heard, spoke to him. "Arise, Harold, son of James. Let us get a good look at you." It was Hades who shrank himself and stepped up to a now a scared-looking young wizard as he let a bit of aura escape him. Indeed, Harry did feel Hades' aura as his knees began to buckle, but the Lord of the Underworld caught him as the young boy began to fall, only to gaze at his lightning bolt-shaped scar on the left side of his head. Something wasn't right about that scar. It shouldn't look freshly cut if what Hecate explained earlier is true. He could feel an evil presence emanating from the scar. Placing his hand over the scar, he slowly pulled it from Harry's head as Harry himself screamed bloody murder. The presence itself fought, but could not fight the god of the underworld's power. When he finally got all of whatever it was from his legacy's scar, he gazed at it as Harry fainted in Hecate's arms. What he saw and felt angered him greatly, so much so, that he turned to Zeus with righteous anger and fury and said, "Brother, Do you know what this is? Zeus shrank down to Hades' level and gazed at the black mass now quivering in Hades' palm. A few seconds later and realization came to Zeus' eyes as he replied, "No, what foolish mortal would dare such a thing?" "Hecate, did you know?" "Yes, I saw through Harry's memories earlier. This is another reason why I wished to meet with you, Lord Hades." Harry had a long time ago locked that soul fragment within a vault within his own mind. When he realized what it was, he felt he wasn't strong enough or old enough to have it removed yet. He was going to wait a few years till he felt the time was right. "My lords." Artemis, now worried, asked, "Father, what is it?" "A horcrux. This fragment is one of several from what it feels like," Zeus answered. "7 to be exact." Hades said, clearly pissed off. "It seems I owe Harpo the foul more punishment for lying to me about leaving notes on how to create these abominations. This one was unintentional and accidental. The night this bastard attacked the Potters, Harry must have defended his brother and taken the killing curse upon himself. Voldemort, whom this fragment is a part of, apparently had an unstable soul the night his body was destroyed, and a piece latched onto Harry here. But how did Harry survive the killing curse?" A voice belonging to a bushy-haired yet beautiful brunette known as Athena asked. "From the images I saw in his mind, Harry's mother prepared to sacrifice herself, but the monster known as Voldemort merely tossed her aside since she was wandless and rendered her unconscious as she was smacked into a wall." Zeus and Hades explained to the other gods about horcrux and how they're created and what they're capable of. All of the gods looked sick, but none more so than Aphrodite as she ran from the room holding both her stomach and mouth. Hecate had healed Harry by that time as Hades conjured a compass and placed the fragment within it so it could be used to track the other fragments later. Ares in his biker attire stepped up and pushed out his senses towards the boy. What he found made him respect the boy even more. He found that the boy had the heart of a warrior and was strong physically as he was magically for a young wizard who was self-taught sword fighting and archery. When Harry was awakened, all the gods returned to their thrones, with the knowledge to wait to tell the boy of his destiny since Hecate spoke of a prophecy spoken by a supposed seer. When Apollo asked for this seer's name, he fell off his throne laughing his ass off. When it was asked why he did so, he explained that the Trelawney family may have had seers in the family in one point in time, but that it died out due to the inbreeding, which is why Sybil Trelawney is a near-level squib. Apparently said prophecy became a self-fulfilling one only because Albus Dumbledore allowed to become so and nurtured it along. Zeus and Hades revealed their relation to Harry as he was enthralled with them. They then told him because of his willingness to protect the hunters of Artemis, they would offer him a place as a demigod. Because he had the blood of Zeus and Hades running in his blood, it was decided Artemis would adopt Harry and give him a family. "Family?" Harry thought to himself. "But why me? What makes me so special?" he asked aloud. Artemis, who had continued watching the boy's body language and the inner turmoil within him, knew that they were doing the right thing in taking in this boy. "Because you who defended my hunters without hesitation, with no thought to yourself, chose to aid and protect them, and that shows me that even some males can be trusted. If you live with me as my blood-adopted son, you will be tested on your resolve daily by your sisters, your patience will be pushed, but should you pass the trials living with me and my hunters, you will know that we protect our own. You will be accepted and noticed, more importantly, because I have never had a child to call my own. I love my hunters as my sisters and daughters, but I guess somewhere in the back of my mind, I have always wondered what it would be like to have a son. I will come to love even you and vice versa." Harry was floored by her response. He didn't care if he was tested, he just wanted a family more than anything. "Will you, Harry James Potter, allow my daughter Artemis to blood adopt you and take you in as her son?" Zeus asked in a questionable tone. Harry began to go over the variables in his own mind, weighing the possibilities of this chance. Finally, after a bit of time, he looked up and said, "I accept." Hecate already had the ritual prepared as this was the first time in history it was ever done. Harry had been strapped down to a table as the gods observed. Hecate and Artemis stood on either side of the table. Artemis used one of her hunting knives to cut open her hand in Harry's hand. She then cupped her bleeding hand into Harry's as Hecate used her magic to bind the goddess and child as mother and son. As Artemis held Harry's hand, he began to spasm and cry out in agony as Artemis' golden blood began to flow into his hand and through his own blood. Apollo, who stood off to the side, was worried but trusted Hecate to know what she was doing. After about 10 minutes it was over and Harry's features changed somewhat to resemble Artemis through his cheekbones. Apollo checked his eyes to see if they responded since Harry was still breathing on his own. When he opened them, Harry's eyes had changed from jade green to moon silver with green iris. "How does he look to you, sis?" Apollo asked cheekily. Artemis could only gaze at her newly made demigod son and caressed his cheek tenderly. Even at this moment, the bond between the newly made mother and son was growing strong. Only one word escaped her mouth in a whisper: beautiful. After that day, when Artemis had returned to camp with Harry, it was as Artemis warned him. He was able to retrieve his belongings and place them within the hunter's camp, where his own tent remained next to Artemis for easy access. As he settled in, he was met by scorn, but yet he was used to worse, so he soldiered on. Over time, as Harry did many things for the hunters, cooking, cleaning, and many other things, he indeed became their favorite chew toy, but he would not be bowed. After a full year, when Zoe and Phoebe saw that Harry would not be broken, they held a meeting with Artemis and the other hunters. They had come to realize that as much as they had pushed, they could not break his spirit, and it was time to call it quits. It was time they acted like the sisters they were, and a unanimous vote was called, and the next day Harry woke up to a room full of things they had taken from him, and then some. Gifts were given from a birthday, and Christmas passed. Almost a mere half-hour later, he was met outside of his tent with sisters who smiled in respect and love. He then realized he had passed the test. It would be a few years later when his destiny would be called into play, as from that day forth, he decided he truly knew where he belonged. February 7, 2001, 7 p.m. American time. For several days, the Animagi had watched the camp full of girls for any sign of their quarry. The people in question were former members of the Order of the Phoenix led by Albus Dumbledore. They were currently in their animagus forms of a stag and a grim, James Potter and Sirius Black. They had watched for over the last 24 hours, hoping to see any sign of the boy that was Harry James Potter. Seeing their attention was on the camp, they would not notice someone sneaking up behind from above, using the trees as their cover. He knew they would come for him. Took them 4 years, but he knew. They didn't expect Harry to remember their animagus forms. But he did. So here he was, dressed in camouflaged hunter's clothing minus sleeves, with archer attire upon his arms, hands, and back. A camouflaged hood obscuring his face so his identity could not be discerned. He was crouching on a tree limb, watching them search for him with their eyes, but not seeing him. So it was with a bit of satisfaction that he took out a blowgun and 2 darts laced with a potion for rendering his prey both unconscious and paralyzed from the neck down for a little over 5 hours. With an unwavering aim, he fired in quick succession into his targets' necks and smirked when he heard their animal yelps. When the stag and grim fell, he apparated from the tree limb to the fallen forms of his animal-shifted father and godfather. Placing the animagus upon both of his shoulders, he began walking to the opening doors of his adopted mother's camp. Once past, the doors closed as some of his sisters followed him to his mother's tent, while eyeing the animals upon his shoulders. The female guards posted at the entrance had questioning looks upon their faces. "Animaguses. My father and godfather," he was able to clarify. Understanding came to them fast, along with looks of approval, and then moved to let him and his entourage through. His mother Artemis, sitting upon her throne in both her adult form and Greek-styled clothing, eyed the animals upon her son's shoulders until she sensed the magic emanating from the stag and grim as she came to know them. Upon standing as Harry roughly dropped them from his shoulders and knelt in front of her with his head bowed, she waved her hand as the animagi was reverted back to human forms. Zoe and Phoebe on either side of her, both of their hands inching towards their weapons to bring harm upon Harry's betrayers. "Where were they?" she asked in a steely tone. "Outside the encampment, my lady. They were looking for me. They may have something that pinpointed my location to here, but how that is possible, I know not. So it may seem. Very well." She turned back to her throne and sat. "Administer the antidotes. I want to know everything they know and how they found you." Nodding, he placed James Potter and Sirius Black in rune-crafted magic-suppressing cuffs, then attached the cuffs into a set of chains that was secured to the floor in front of the moon goddess. Then he injected them both with the antidote to the paralyzing agent and then placed smelling salts to their nasal passages, allowing them to awaken disoriented at first. As they came to, he walked back into the shadows until he was called forth to reveal himself. When the 2 adult wizards awoke, they were confused and their muscles stiff. They then both upon looking at one another realized they'd been caught and were no longer in their animal-based forms and were currently wearing magic-suppressing cuffs that were chained to the floor. Looking at the young woman in front of them sitting on what appeared to be a wooden throne with a silver Alaskan wolf sitting beside her, she was wearing what appeared to be Greek-based attire, and two girls on either side of her, one of which they recognized from meeting years ago, and the only thought running through their minds were, "Oh shit, we're Ed." They weren't stupid. They knew that the gods were still alive and active in the mortal realm. They had a run-in or two with demigods and one of these huntresses of Artemis in their early days as Aurors. They knew that the woman in front of them was most likely Artemis herself. With that knowledge, they decided honesty was best as they had no wish to become sport for Artemis or her huntresses. It was James Potter who began as he had no wish to be here any longer than was necessary. "Lady Artemis," he bowed his head while on his knees, something that even Sirius Black copied, "I know this looks bad, but we had no intentions of spying on you and or your huntresses." "Oh, do tell Lord Potter." Seeing the surprise on his face as he looked up in shock, she chuckled. "Yes, I know who you both are. Lord James Charles Potter, Lord of the most ancient and most noble house of Potter, if you can actually call your house noble after what you, your wife, and the Merlin wannabe Albus Dumbledore, and this foolish mutt intended to do to a child. And of course, for the mutt, we have Sirius Orion Black, Lord of the most ancient and most noble house of Black. Why your mother named you after a man that I once loved is beyond me. You have none of the qualities he had." "Oi, I resent that," Sirius shouted in indignation. "And why is that, Lord Black? The fact that you betrayed a child makes you better or equal to my Orion?" His face drooped as if the wind was knocked out of him at that bit of hard sudden honesty. He did betray his godson, and he knew it. He thought as James did, that Harry would let it be. But Harry obviously disagreed and swore to never to allow others to write his destiny for him by running as Sirius had done at his age all those years ago. Oh, how Sirius regrets ever listening to Dumbledore since then. Artemis could see how those chosen words defeated the once proud marauder. "I thought not. Lady Artemis, we've made many mistakes, yes. But we want a chance to make it right. After all, though I am a mortal, even I know you yourself have made mistakes in the many centuries you've existed." James Potter shot back at her. Her huntresses and her son who remained hidden in shadow hissed in shock. "You've got some nerve, Mr. Potter. And courage. Befitting the House of Gryffindor indeed. Though you may be right, I have made my share of mistakes. As it is, I and my huntresses are unable to harm you or your family and allies, but do not think me stupid." However, she rose from her throne and walked over to the bound wizards. Grabbing James by the chin, she forced his face to look upon her own. "I would never rob a child of their own destiny or livelihood. Nor would I neglect a child or betray them by forgetting they existed like you and the rest of the pathetic Dumbledore worshippers have." Letting his chin go as she saw the defeated look in his eyes, she spat on the ground in front of him and Sirius. Sitting back on her throne, she then asked, "You are here to ask for my son, are you not?" The words "my son" shocked both men as they looked upon her with mouths opened wide. She only smirked. "Oh yes, didn't you know? Surely the Potter family tapestry would have told you otherwise. You see, it's a funny thing really. Apparently you and the Potter clan are descended from the son of my father Zeus through his son Gryffindor and uncle Hades through his youngest Peverell's son Ignitus. When Harry came into the lives of my huntresses and I, he had already left you. He was going to begin a life here in the forests of the States where he would rather be safe instead of a pawn of your dear Dumbledore. But one day, as he was hunting for food, a pack of wolves led by King Lycaon himself ambushed several of my huntresses who were hunting for food themselves. Imagine their surprise when arrows of silver found themselves flying into the dogs from several locations throughout the forest, only for young Harry to accidentally apparate onto a weak branch of a weak tree. He lost the element of surprise and his invisibility spell to falter as he broke his arm on impact. Then Lycaon attacks him for defending my sisters and nearly kills him, but not without Harry leaving him with a scar. He was then punched into a tree where I found him after sending Lycaon back to Tartarus. When I took the boy to my brother to heal him, Hecate sensed his presence. Imagine my surprise to find out that Harry is Hecate's true chosen champion and legacy. James and Sirius paled at the implications of where this was going as she continued. When my brother and Lady Hecate finished healing Harry, Lord Zeus and Uncle Hades gave him a choice. To remain as he was or to have a new family with me as his mother. He chose me. I then blood adopted him as my son and awakened and strengthened the demigod blood already flowing through his veins as Lady Hecate did the ritual herself. Then as a boon to me for protecting my hunters, Zeus and the other gods of Olympus have chosen him as a hunter and protector, to find other demigod children to protect them, and bring them either to Camp Half-Blood, Camp Jupiter, or to me. Though the only ones welcome here and given a choice are of the female persuasion. He has several patron gods and goddesses who look out for him, mostly myself, Hecate, Zeus, Hades, Hera, Hestia, my twin brother Apollo, Athena, and Hermes, while having Ares' respect as a warrior. Aphrodite keeps trying to bed him by temporarily aging him into an adult and having her way with him. Something that displeases me greatly, but her resolve on the matter is moot seeing as he has denied her that privilege. He has no wish to father a child so early in his young life as of yet. Damn, way to go cub. Having the goddess of love after you. I take my hat off to you. Sirius applauded in his head. James on the other hand almost went green in the face when he heard what the goddess of love tried to do his son. But the fact that he had the strength to turn her down and then finding out that Harry chose Artemis over his own blood hurt deeply. But then to choose a life of servitude to the gods by watching over and protecting their children, he couldn't be more proud. What of his magical training? James asked, head bowed in shame, showing the sadness in his eyes knowing he had failed as a father. Shortly after Harry disappeared, the portrait of his father let loose upon him and revealed how James committed an act unbecoming of a Potter and how Charles or his wife Doria would speak no further to him, Lily, or Sirius until the situation was undone. James then had his and Sirius family resign from the Order of the Phoenix and decided to do what was right, which is what led them to this point. He has received a complete knowledge transfer from Hecate as well as his very own grimoire to study from. He has no need for a wand or a focus of any kind. Harold, could you come here for a moment, my son? From behind his father and godfather, he stepped from the shadows still wearing the dark green camouflaged gear that he wore when he apprehended them. His hood was still up as his face was hidden when he walked around them only to kneel in front of his adopted mother with his head bowed in submission. On his back was a set of arrows within a quiver and a modern up-to-date compound bow in his hands that shined as if made from silver. As he remained kneeling and his head bowed, Lady Artemis ordered him to rise without a word being uttered, merely with her hand rising did he do as she commanded. Lower your hood, my son, and gaze upon your betrayers. As he did so, James and Sirius gasped in shock as his once beautiful emerald eyes that resembled Lily Potter's now were silver with emerald iris. His hair long and still had the unruly messiness that all Potter men had. Like that of a lion's mane. His facial structures resembling that of Lady Artemis. His body unnaturally built for a child of his age. His muscles big yet sinewy, built for strength and speed respectively. Harry, his father whispered in shock as he and Sirius looked upon the lost Potter son. Potter, Black. He acknowledged with a nod. How did you find me? I'm pretty sure I didn't leave anything behind with which to be tracked. It was Lily. She still had a cone with hair samples that she used to scry for you. Harry, we want you to know how sorry we are and wanted you to come home. But now you can't seeing as how you now work for the gods. A tearful James Potter said softly as his head was down. Never has a head of House Potter ever felt so defeated. That may not be so. The gods and myself have held a meeting recently. We found through the ghosts still walking the halls of Hogwarts and whom answers to Hades that Dumbledore intends to bait the other Potter child and Tom Riddle also known as Lord Voldemort by placing the Philosopher's Stone within the school. Or at least a copy of it since Nicholas and Perenelle are actually demigods themselves who gained favor with Zeus and was blessed with immortality with the stipulation that they continue to aid Harry and the children of Camp Half-Blood, Camp Jupiter, and of course my camp. The original was presented to Lord Hades years ago. Father and the Olympian Council were adamant that Voldemort must be destroyed. We know how he still lives and as we speak, he has somehow found his way inside of Hogwarts. Dumbledore knows this, yet has done nothing about it. He wants Charles to fight Voldemort over the stone. Here James and Sirius both went from shocked to trying to get up with anger on their faces, struggling with the magic-suppressing cuffs. Both wanted nothing more but to kill Dumbledore and now had a reason to do so. Sit down. Now. The combined power of her words and the cuffs forced them both to comply. Harry will go with you, as his mission will be to retrieve the specter of Tom Riddle and collect the anchors that he used to bind himself to the land of the living. Here she stood and pulled what looked like a small oval-shaped box from the left side of her waist pocket. She asked for his right hand and placed it in his hand and closed his fingers upon it. This compass will point you to wherever his anchors are. A magical 3D map of Europe and Scotland will present itself and give you the exact locations of Tom Riddle's horcruxes. It will show not only the landscapes, but the housing of said object, and will vibrate when close to just one of them. Turning back to the bound men, she informed them in no uncertain terms, Harry will be able to watch over your other son Charles and protect him from Dumbledore's manipulations, if possible train him while maintaining his duties on gathering the demigods and bringing them to one of the 3 necessary camps, depending on the circumstances of course. In return, war is coming. Kronos is rising, though Father is blind to the mere idea of Kronos' return. Some of us gods and goddesses are not. You let me and Sirius go, you got an alliance. The House of Potter will stand by you, as well as any witch, wizard, centaur, goblin, dragon, whatever I can muster to my side. The Lord of House Potter growled out as he needed to get to his other son and stop Albus Dumbledore before it was too late. Seconded. The House of Black will answer the call to duty against Kronos, Sirius said with his head held high and fire in his eyes. Seeing no deceit in their words, she nodded satisfied at this new alliance. Are you sure if that's a good idea, Mother? Should Dumbledore find out my status via the Phoenix Fox, it could put a cramp in those plans. Not to worry, his loyalty is to Hecate. He knows she has the power to wipe him from existence should he open his beak. More importantly, if we are to be victorious in defeating Kronos' forces, we need allies, my son. You must face your past and make peace with your parents. You have 2 mothers and 1 father. An accord must be made. She placed a hand on his left cheek as she faced him and kissed his right cheek. But know this, James Potter and Sirius Black, any harm befalls my son, you and your family will not be safe from myself or his sisters should any of you be responsible. Understood? They nodded and gave magical oaths to that effect as they looked upon the eyes of the many female hunters surrounding them both. All with bows drawn and notched and knife blades gleaming in the light as they were unholstered. When the magical oaths were made and the oaths taking effect, Artemis was satisfied. She then informed them that they and Harry would be allowed to leave in the morning. Harry then directed them to his tent where they would sleep. James recognized one of his tents but would not say anything, seeing he had no right. They were served freshly killed and cooked deer meat that Harry assured them was not human-turned-animal meat like Artemis was famous for according to legend. He served them with fresh bread, steaming potatoes, salads, dressings, and wine from Dionysus himself from when Harry saved several of his children. They barely made small talk since Harry had to also prepare dinner for Artemis and her hunters since it was his night. All who were present enjoyed Harry's cooking very much, even Artemis, and none of them would dare miss his meals as he made more than enough to feed an army, the same thing he had made for his father and godfather. The 3 white buck-tailed deer he had hunted just over a day ago had been prepared just to their liking as it was finished cooking and prepped with the spices and dressings that Harry was known for using. He and everyone else had made offerings to their godly parents into a fire that a young girl who was secretly Hestia was tending. Harry, Artemis, and a handful of hunters who paid attention knew who she was and interacted as much as they could with her. Harry would later in the night introduce Sirius and James to her when asked by a curious Sirius. The next day, Artemis walked Harry and his companions outside the encampment where she gave him her love and wished him luck on this quest. He promised her he would return as soon as he could, and maybe with more young women who may want to join the hunt. Artemis had no problem accepting witches into her fold. In fact, the more the magical power the merrier should her brother or any male demigod step out of line with her and her huntresses. Making sure he had his weapons upon him and anything else he may need, she wanted to make sure he was safe like any mother should. Something that gave the huntresses something to giggle at and causing Harry to blush in embarrassment. The night before, in secret she gave him a long big-ass Bowie knife with a black blade that Hades had specifically had designed for destroying horcruxes, giving him the needed edge. It was designed to look like one of Sylvester Stallone's Rambo knives, something Harry found amusing that Hades was a fan of. Giving him a hug that he returned in earnest, they both stepped back and he slowly turned to his father and godfather, grabbed both of their arms and flame teleported back to Europe while Artemis closed her eyes and prayed to the fates on a safe journey for her son. Lily Potter was just sitting down with her son and newborn daughter Rose Evelyn Potter to dinner with the remainder of her extended family consisting of the Blacks, the Lupins, and the Tonks. Lily, who had yet to begin touching her own plate, she'd look upon her newborn daughter and realize the mistake she made in betraying her other son Harry. Her daughter Rose was a reminder of what she did to him. She now understood that no matter the status, that all children were precious, even her own. Being reminded of her failure every day had taken a toll on her soul and her body as she never stopped thinking about her Harry. Problem was, it was too late to undo the damage as before Harry had ran away. The contract had become binding in which Harry would be forced to marry the Delacour daughter on his 17th birthday. Lily had lost much of her appetite since then. She was skinny and pale, a shell of her former self. Only with Harry's return would she possibly get her old self back. It was through the forced feeding from her husband James, Andromeda Tonks née Black and Amelia Black née Bones that she even able to eat, let alone still remain coherent. As Amelia and Andromeda both glared at her, she picked up her fork and began to tenderly and slowly eat. On her fourth forkful of eating some vegetable side item, a flare of fire was seen several feet to the left of the dinner table as three men dropped in. Bloody hell, that's even more useful than apparating. A familiar voice called out as two of the men turned around only to be recognized as James Potter and Sirius Black. The third in between had yet to turn around as his almost dark forest-colored hood attached to a sleeveless tunic was still up. Those present was able to tell due to his bare arms that he was strong and lithe, meaning he was both a strong, fast and possibly very deadly fighter. He carried a modern compound bow seen in Muggle hunters on the television, as well as a double quiver, specifically designed for carrying extra arrows. Strapped to his waist on the left side was what looked like a really big and nasty knife. His clothes were dark and looked like they were designed for working from within the darkness. Strapped to his arms were several daggers as well as tattoos with various lettering and symbols. Lily stood up as did everyone else as the unknown young man slowly turned and lowered his hood. He looked down at first so his hair covered his identity as it was rather long like that of a lion's mane, but then looked up as his eyes took in his surroundings and the people currently looking at him. Lily could no longer see the green eyes this young man shared with her as she knew who he was upon seeing him. He looked like James yet was now different. His eyes were silver with green irises. He was covered in the scent of nature as he was dirty due to wherever he stayed. "Ha! Harry," Lily stammered out. His eyes that looked around the room came to rest upon the one who called his name. "Mrs. Potter," he acknowledged as he nodded at her. She flinched at his cold tone as she then slowly walked up and raised her left hand toward his cheek, at least until he caught her hand in a soft yet firm grip and looked her in the eye and shook his head. "No. Not yet, you have to earn that right. Just tell a house elf to come and wake me in the morning as I go to sleep off this time difference. I'll be in my old room." And with that, he dropped her hand and flame teleported to the room that was originally his as he did not miss the little girl that looked like Lily and James. Though the child itself did not set him off, it was the fact that they thought it right to have another and be reminded of what they did to him. The fact that James and Sirius did not mention her just made things worse. "He hates me," Lily cried as James caught her before she fell to the floor in a heap. As he redirected her to a chair, everyone began to bombard them with questions that they answered well into the night after putting all the kids to bed. A broken Lily Potter was astounded yet ashamed of what she found out about her long-lost son. The fact that the gods saw fit to take him in and had allowed Artemis the moon goddess to adopt him since the blood of Zeus and Hades flowed through his, James, Charles, and now Rose's blood. How he received the blessing of over half the Olympians and became their seeker in finding demigods and keeping them safe from monsters while taking them to camps for their kind. "What do I do, James? How can I make it right? Even Artemis has taken over my title as mother to him. She did leave him with a stipulation, to try and make peace with us, but he's gonna be busy for a while. Aside from his duties as finder and retriever of demigods, he's also gonna be finding Voldemort's anchors," James said with a glass of fire whiskey in front of him. "What did you say?" Amelia asked shakily. James and even Sirius, who put in his own knowledge of what Artemis revealed, was able to finally reveal how to beat Voldemort. Sirius had revealed to Amelia everything about the Black family as she was now a Black by marriage and even she was well informed of soul anchors, or better known as horcruxes. It was revealed as well what Dumbledore intended to do for this coming school year and how it was up to the DMLE to stop him before it was too late. From what James surmised, since Voldemort was apparently alive, though weak, he may have possessed a teacher, so he'd go after the Philosopher's Stone. Of course it was then that Sirius began to chuckle as Lily glared at him. "What's so funny, Sirius?" "It's a fake." Sirius spoke, barely able to contain himself. When Lily gave him, and then James, a questioning look, James himself chuckled as he revealed that Nicholas and Perenelle Flammel were already immortal and former demigods and now minor gods. Nicholas and Perenelle apparently pranked the great Albus Dumbledore by making him think that what he had was the real deal, as they say. The original stone was given to Lord Hades, who then passed it to Hecate as they were on the best of terms. James then revealed that he and Sirius had sworn oaths to aid the gods against Kronos. Amelia, Lily, Ted, and Andromeda paled even further. What did you say?" Ted asked in a bare whisper. "Kronos is rising. But Zeus won't accept it." James whispered. "Whatever you do, don't speak ill of Zeus. He may be listening, even now. Seeing it coming before they could even say it. No matter what Zeus says, we have to be vigilant. Tomorrow, we confront Albus, and if time permits it, we'll be done with Voldemort before the end of next year." "How is it you know of Kronos possibly rising?" Amelia asked. "A prophecy. When Harry slept last night, Artemis called and spoke with Sirius and I secretly about a child who also has a destiny. Apparently during World War II, the big three, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades made a pact and swore on the Styx not to spawn any more demigods. Zeus fell off the wagon and his daughter called Talia was nearly killed. Grandfather Zeus, in order to save her, turned her into a tree and used her life force to create a barrier that erected around Camp Half-Blood in New York. It's to this day, still up and keeping monsters away from the other children of the gods. But Artemis suspects Poseidon may have broken the oath as well. She doesn't know about Grandfather Hades yet. "So, what do we do?" Ted Tonks asked. "We do as we swore we do. We aid the gods. First is to take care of both Dumbledore and Riddle. Then we get as many families and magical peoples, clans, beasts, everything we can, and we prepare for war," James said, stern, with Cyrus nodding. "Riddle?" Amelia asked. "His name, Voldemort's true name, Tom Marvolo Riddle," James said as he revealed the anagram Riddle created, and a second later, he heard a gasp. Turning, he looked upon the shocked expression of his father's portrait. "Thomas? Are you certain, James?" his father asked as he spoke for the first time in many years. James nodded as his father hung his head in shame as he revealed what he knew of Tom Riddle, that he was a half-blood who was in Slytherin, the first to be so in a century, with Severus Snape being the second. When Charles asked about Harry, his mother, who had been listening, turned around as well in her husband and hers shared portrait. James revealed everything, including their lineage and family legacy being descended from Zeus and Hades. Something not even Charles and Doria Potter Black knew about. They promised to speak later as they knew that the gathered crowd needed rest before confronting Dumbledore in the morning. Even Charles and Doria needed to acclimate to the knowledge of their grandson's new purpose as an adopted son of Artemis, and now a finder and retriever of demigods. The next day, a refreshed group of adults were fully awake and had called on Remus to watch the children while they visited a manipulative old man who may lose any and or all positions of authority he held if he didn't do as the parents suggested. Amelia Blackbones had already used her own flow to speak to the Minister of Magic Cornelius Fudge about the danger Dumbledore placed the students in and was asking for a warrant for his arrest. When Fudge realized the implications of what was going on, he agreed and was able to have a warrant for Dumbledore's arrest created. When Amelia flew back to Potter Manor, she found Harry in his hunter outfit with his compound bow strapped to his back. He apparently was up before anyone else as the other adults just walked up into the room. "Harry, what are you doing?" James asked. "I'm joining you," was all he said. "Harry, was all Lily Potter got out before Harry narrowed his eyes at her and gave her a look that said, "I'm going and that's final." Sirius, who had just arrived and saw the look Harry was giving his birth mother, came forward and spoke. "I think it would be prudent to allow Harry to join us. After all, there is a chance Voldemort may have left one of his anchors in Hogwarts." Remus and Lily hissed at the name where Harry narrowed his eyes at the two and said, "S." "Harry, language," his father said sternly. "Fear of the false name of Tom Riddle only gives it more power. He isn't no lord, and he sure isn't after this month, immortal. I promise you that. I'll send him to Grandfather Hades and have already been ensured he will be thoroughly punished. Agreed, but that still doesn't give you the right to use your foul language to your mother and Remus. They didn't deserve that. Turning his back to the adults, he muttered, whatever, and flamed away. They knew he was heading to Hogwarts, most likely the old Mont's office. Remus wished them all well as the house heads and wives of Potter, Black, and Tonks flew to Dumbledore's office. The scene they came upon was Albus Dumbledore's hand stabbed into his desk with one of Harry's daggers. Harry twirling a wand in his hand as Dumbledore tried but could not remove the knife from his hand, separating him from his desk. "Harry, what have you done?" James asked in a horrified voice as he gazed at a pained Albus Dumbledore who could not move the knife from both his hand and the desk. "He raised his wand to me. I reacted accordingly to how I react to a threat. Also, do you know anything about this wand in my hand?" he asked nonchalantly as he stopped twirling it in his hands and held it out with 2 fingers from the middle of the wand's base. James and the others looked hard at it but could only say that it was Dumbledore's wand. Harry chuckled darkly as he used his empty free hand to rip the knife from Dumbledore's hand, allowing him to step back as cried out and held his hand gingerly as Lily rushed over and began to administer first aid to the headmaster's ruined hand. Using a handkerchief to clean his blade, he then incinerated the bloodied fabric as he conjured a seat for himself and said, "Let me tell you a story I am sure most if not all of you know. 3 brothers thought they could cheat death. The eldest was rewarded with a wand incapable of being beaten. The middle brother was given a stone to speak to the dead. The youngest was given Death's cloak so that even Death could not see him. You see where I'm going with this?" he asked as he twirled the wand in his fingers again. "The elder wand," James whispered in shock as his eyes gazed upon the wand in his son's hand. All of the others gasped as their minds took in the clues of Harry's explanation. "Didn't think it was real, did you?" Harry asked in a serious tone. "Seeing you own the cloak that Death gave over to the younger Peverell male, making the Potters direct descendants of the 3 brothers of legend." "And the stone?" James asked, almost in trepidation and fear at the same time. "It exists, and I have an idea where it is, as Death himself told me a special tale of certain individuals whose souls are in a state of unrest." "Impossible." Dumbledore spoke up now that he was no longer bleeding as Lily had repaired the damage her son had done. "Not quite Albus, of which only we pointing to herself and the others minus Albus Dumbledore, will speak of after I give you this," Amelia said as she handed Dumbledore the warrant for his arrest. He didn't see her secretly pull her wand from her sheath on her wrist as he had by then taken the warrant and read its contents. His face paled as he read what was in his hands and he looked up in consternation. "Why, Amelia, what have I done?" "The Philosopher's Stone. We know you have it. You will hand it over and you will come with us. You are under arrest for placing a dangerous object in a school soon to be full of innocent children. Comply and I will ensure you get a fair trial. Do it not, and I assure you, you will not like the consequences," she answered in a calm yet serious voice. Dumbledore turned to the boy who now leveled an arrow pointed directly at his forehead as no one saw him draw his bow or notch the arrow. "I'd do it if I were you, old man," Harry stated in a voice that left no room for anything else. James by then was able to summon any and all extra wands and portkeys, which was a few devices and an extra wand from Dumbledore's person. The headmaster, seeing he was defenseless and had no way of escaping, closed his eyes and tried to call out to Fawkes, but his Phoenix friend would not come to aid or answer his mental call. Harry noticed this and informed him that the Phoenix didn't answer to him, instead it answered to those who didn't do things like he, Albus Dumbledore, had done. That it aided those whose heart and soul was pure, which apparently was not Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. He then had Dumbledore reveal and hand over the acclaimed Philosopher's Stone. Once Harry verified it was what they were looking for, Harry told them and saw it destroyed before all of them with the remains vanished by one Harry James Potter. Amelia slipped a pair of magic-suppressing cuffs on the old man who she then escorted through the flow with Sirius following. Moments afterward, James used the flow to summon Minerva McGonagall and explained the situation as she was next in line to take over Hogwarts. As he said this, indeed the school's powers and wards did indeed transfer to her as she closed her eyes and found herself now in full control of Hogwarts. Moments later she gasped as a lot of the safety features within Hogwarts were shut down, as apparently Dumbledore and past headmasters were allowing things to deteriorate to suit their needs and wants. She found out all that she could as Hogwarts itself directed her to a wall where a secret passage awaited her as she disappeared. James and Lily made to follow, but Harry wouldn't hear of it as he looked at them and shook his head, no. A second later, Harry's compass began to go off as he picked it up and opened it. A 3D map of Hogwarts presented itself as a red dot made itself known. Harry zoomed in where the dot was located as the 7th floor in a left corridor of the castle. James came over and looked. "I know that area, there's nothing there," he exclaimed. "That you know of," Harry replied. "Maybe an elf will know." James didn't want to argue as a few moments later, an elf made itself known as Minerva McGonagall returned, though now pale. The new headmistress called forth an elf and had it bring tea and refreshments. She then began to explain things to James and Lily as Harry's attention was on the elf. As James and Lily spoke to her, Harry called the young elf over after it left a cup of tea and scones for the new headmistress on the desk. Kneeling before the young elf, he asked, "What is your name, great elf?" Harry asked as the elf's eyes took him in and widened. "You be touched by hunting goddess. You be her son," she squeaked in her young voice. "I's be Tippy." "Good to meet you, Tippy, and yes, she blood adopted me. Artemis is my mother as I am her son. What do you know of the 7th floor in a left corridor?" "That be's the area where come and go room is," Tippy answered. "Can you tell me how to access the room, Tippy?" "Just walk in front of area 3 times asking for what you want and it appears. It responds to whatever you ask. It's behind the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy." Harry scratched its right ear in affection and gave her some treats he conjured from nothing and told her to enjoy them as he looked to his parents and told them what he intended to do. James nodded as Lily made to follow. James said no, but Lily was adamant as she followed her son. She would fight to get him back, but there were things he still needed to know. When they got to the 7th floor left corridor, Harry had Lily stand aside as he walked the hall 3 times after moving Barnabas' tapestry, all the while thinking of a place to hide things. An ancient-looking door appeared as Harry opened it and held it open for his mother. Lily looked around as if she found a treasure trove as books, brooms, cauldrons, and many other things from times past. Harry though could not be bothered with all of that as his compass was pinpointing to where it was wanting him to go. He came upon a row of books, which he knocked down, and there in front of him was a tiara. The compass vibrating dangerously, Lily came over to see what was going off as the compass was vibrating madly. Unstrapping his blade from its sheath, Harry lifted the Stygian blade in an underhanded strike, but it was the voice of a female spectre that stopped him as it screamed, "Stop." Harry and Lily turned as the spirit of a beautiful woman floated in front of them. "Identify yourself, spirit," Harry called out as Lily turned to rebuke her son from speaking to who she knew to be the Grey Lady of Ravenclaw House. "My name is Helena Ravenclaw, daughter of Rowena Ravenclaw. Why do you insist on destroying my mother's tiara, son of the Huntress?" Helena asked. "I have a quest to fulfill. Once this tiara has been purged of its dark taint, I will restore it to its pristine form and give it to my Lily Potter, and she in turn will return it to Ravenclaw House, and whoever is its head." Lily, who had turned at Harry's blunder, could only lower her head as Harry still refused to call her mother. "Do you swear to restore it, son of House Potter?" "Yes, my lady." "Then so be it, champion of the gods and magic." Harry turned back and with a mighty strike, slammed the tip of the black blade into the jewel of the diadem. Half a second later, the darkness inside it was barely able to scream as it was absorbed into the blade and was on a one-way trip to Hades' realm, where the furies of Hades' domain awaited it. Harry then pulled the blade back and reholstered it in its sheath. The diadem was split in half as the jewel leaked what appeared to be black tar-like substance. He vanished the jewel and its remains and then opened a pouch on his side and found a suitable jewel in his pouch as he restored the diadem to its former glory and then placed and sealed the jewel that he then had replaced from the original as it had been tainted. Once it was complete, Harry held out his hands and was able to conjure a special miniature box from nothing and gently placed the diadem within and handed it to Lily Potter. "I thank you, Harry Potter Artemison. I can now rest in peace." "Helena, is it finally over?" another voice asked as Harry and Lily looked back behind Helena Ravenclaw as a ghost of a man with a patch of what looked like blood on his chest and falling to his stomach area, and an older lady looking like Helena stood by the door. That's the Bloody Baron, of Slytherin House. Lily gasped out, and the woman next to him is Lady Rowena Ravenclaw herself. Harry spoke up. Yes, Waldo, it's finally over, we can now rest in peace, beloved. At the name Waldo, Harry snorted as the ghostly image looked at him and sighed. Yes, I know all about the character in the children's book within the Muggle world, young hunter. Finish that bastard riddle, and restore the honor of Salazar Slytherin. I will, Lord Baron. Come, daughter, it's time to go. The spirit of Lady Rowena spoke as Helena nodded. She turned and placed a chaste kiss on the left side of Harry's cheek and turned back to the Bloody Baron and Lady Ravenclaw as what can be construed as an image of light appeared and the three occupants walked forward past what looked like clouds or dry ice like vapors. The image of three souls walked forward and welcomed them all with open arms. One was a woman with blonde hair and middle-aged. The other was of a middle-aged warrior with long brown hair and had the ferociousness of a lion. The other male spirit was bald and also middle-aged and smiled at the reunion of their dearest friends. The two men then came forward and both grabbed Harry with one arm each, Slytherin on his left. Harry suspected as he looked like a sly man if his looks said anything, and Gryffindor on his right as the man had a powerful aura about him with the fierceness of a lion. Both souls claimed him as their rightful heir and hoped he would make right the wrongs done and committed by Tom Riddle and his followers. A set of rings appeared on his right hand with the crest of Gryffindor and Slytherin. Both men nodded as the final thing added was the sword of Gryffindor appeared in a shower of silver and red and landed in Harry's now outstretched hands with the sheath appearing on his back. Both then turned and walked back to the heavens, as it then vanished as the last thing Harry and Lily saw was a waving Baron and mother and daughter Ravenclaw women. As for Lily Potter, after seeing and feeling the power of heaven, she felt hope for the first time in her life that her son would forgive her and make peace with her, and give her a second chance. The day after the destruction of the soul fragment that tainted the diadem that once belonged to Rowena Ravenclaw, Harry Potter stood on the front porch of Potter Manor with his arms folded and his eyes looking out into a setting sky as minutes ago. The sun had already fallen for the day. He watched as night began to come as he telepathically updated Artemis on his progress and informed her that he would seek out the next abomination that Tom Riddle created soon. He had learned through the interrogation of Albus Dumbledore by Amelia Blackbones how he withheld a lot of information. He admitted he was a hoarder of information and that to him, it was for the greater good. Since Amelia wasn't getting anywhere, Harry decided to try his hand. As he stepped into the interrogation room, Amelia looked at him with a questioning look. Harry had a steely look and only nodded his head slightly to the side like for Amelia to take a break. Wondering what the Potter heir had in mind, she left the room. Once the door was closed, Harry placed a rune stone on the floor behind the door and stepped up to the old man. Seeing Harry set a rune stone down, the people on the other side of the mirror consisting of the Potters, Sirius Black, and Amelia ran around to the door and tried blasting their way in. But Remus, who watched the yet-to-begin interrogation that his pseudo-nephew was about to begin against Albus Dumbledore, looked at the rune stone and saw that their attempts to open the door only fed the stone more power, making sure no one was coming in. Seeing none of their spells working, the individuals trying to get in went back to the see-through mirror to see about blasting in through the mirror. But upon the arrival of Alistair, Mad Eye, Moody, as soon as Mad Eye saw what was about to happen, he had them hold off on blasting the two-way mirror. He wanted to see the Potter heir, Hunter, at work. Alistair Moody was a legacy of Ares, god of war, so he approved of how the Potter boy went to work when Ares paid him a visit via a dream and told him what was going on and where to go. So here he was as Harry Potter began his interrogation. Dumbledore's hand was nearly healed after Harry had stabbed his hand into his desk with his hunting dagger. The moment Harry had flame teleported into his office, he berated himself for raising his wand at the boy. But the moment the boy looked upon the wand, Dumbledore wasn't fast enough to react as the boy's eyes not only recognized the wand, but snatched it from his grasp with beyond normal speed for a boy his age. The dagger in the hand through the desk was not something the headmaster enjoyed. "Do you know who I am, old man?" Harry asked as his hood was already down, all of his weapons minus the Elder Wand left at Potter Manor. The Elder Wand he pulled from a sheath on his right arm and laid beside him on the table, separating the elderly Dumbledore from the youthful Potter scion. Harry Potter. A child who should be ashamed of himself for attacking an old man. I will see you brought up on charges, young man. You can try. Now, What was the reason behind bringing the Philosopher's Stone to Hogwarts? Harry asked casually after blowing off the old Mon's threat. That is between Nicholas Flamel and myself, Albus said haughtily. Really? Harry said. Having noticed the old Mon's hands on the table, Harry stood and slammed a closed fist on Dumbledore's left hand. Being trained to be a powerful young man through his mother and sisters, including the few daughters of the war god that joined the hunters of Artemis, the force of his blow to the old Mon's hand had left Dumbledore shocked as he then began to cry out in pain as he held a now broken hand with his good hand. Wanna try again? The Flamels are friends of mine and have told me they had no idea you would be bringing the stone to Hogwarts. So I ask again, why did you bring the stone to a school soon to be filled with children? What was your plan? I cannot say. You wouldn't understand the importance of me guiding the world of magical Britain from Hogwarts. The sacrifices one makes, the decisions that have to be made. But not at the cost of innocent blood. What right do you have to play God with people's life, especially children? What was the endgame? Why was the stone at Hogwarts? Harry snarled. When Dumbledore wouldn't answer, Harry realized he would have to take drastic measures, so he grabbed the old Mon's beard over the table and pulled. Snatching his wand, he banished the old fool into a wall opposite the mirror, and then sheathed the wand into its sheath on his arm. Since the sheath itself had charms to prevent theft and summoning from anyone except him, Harry needn't worry about Dumbledore attempting to retrieve the Elder Wand. Having learned that people talk when in pain, Harry, after seeing the old man fall to the floor after hitting the wall, grabbed Dumbledore's uninjured hand and bent the four fingers in an upside-down unnatural angle, though not breaking them, yet. Why was the stone at Hogwarts? V. Voldemort. Dumbledore cried out. What about him? Harry thundered. He's not dead. Dumbledore whimpered from his place on the floor with Harry still holding his hand at an odd angle. What else? There was a prophecy. A page. Prophecy about a child. Born to Th. Those who thrice defied him at the end of July. Who spouted this prophecy and why is it valid? It spoke of a child born at the end of July who would end the Dark Lord and his reign of terror. Only 3 boys fit that description. You, your brother, and one other. Dumbledore whimpered. Who spouted it? He hollered as he punched the old man in the face and tightening his hold on Dumbledore's hand. Sigh. Sybil Trelawney. This young man intended to beat the information out of him, and he had no intention of giving Harry Potter the satisfaction. So he decided to answer, fearing what this young man wanted to know. Harry, knowing the other boy, growled out while letting the old tosser's hand go and throwing him into the table. Neville Longbottom. You needed a pariah, so you decided to pick a child from one of 2 of the strongest light families that's been around longer than your own. In doing so, you tore my family apart. If you knew Voldemort wasn't dead, why didn't you report your theory or ideas to the proper authorities or those needing to know to finally end the fake Dark Lord wannabe's pitiful existence? If he is alive, where is he? I'm afraid. I cannot say. Can't or won't. I will not. The prophesied child must end him, guided by me. Dumbledore thought that would be the end of it, but he was wrong as the younger man grabbed him by his robes, lifted him from the ground and threw him into the mirror, though not enough to break it, only crack it. He then punched the old man in the right side of his face again. Where is he? I cannot tell. You, Dumbledore cried from the floor. Hearing and not caring for the banging on the door, Harry hit the old man again. Where is he? He repeated himself. When the old man still wouldn't answer, he stomped on Dumbledore's left ankle, snapping it. With the amount of pain the old man was in, it wasn't long till he cracked and Harry and everyone else outside the Ministry interrogation cell heard that Voldemort was at Hogwarts and possessing a teacher named Quirinus Quirrell. Picking and slamming the old man upside down on the wooden table very hard, he stormed over to the door, removed the stone and flamed out. Those who had watched the interrogation was horrified at Harry's brutality. At least all but Moody. He was impressed. The kid had guts and style. He could capitalize on that as moments after Dumbledore was removed from the room and sent to a healing room and later to his cell to await trial, Harry flamed back with bound company in tow. Banishing the to-be-Dada professor into a wall, Harry turned and saw the door open. Shutting it, he replaced the rune stone where he originally had it. Harry turned the currently unconscious Quirrell around and removed a purple turban he was wearing. Amelia had called on Aurors to remove the now broken Albus Dumbledore from the room and sent to the infirmary to be healed and then escorted to his cell with magic-suppressing cuffs. But the moment the door bang closed, she and everyone else turned back to watch as the rune stone was replaced and a bound Quirinus Quirrell was spun around so they knew who he was. Then he was turned around again and his turban was knocked off, and lo and behold, there on the back of his head was a currently unconscious Lord Voldemort. Amelia, Sirius and the Potters, along with Moody and the few Aurors who had looked and recognized the defeated Dark Lord, could only gasp in shock and disgust. With magic-suppressing cuffs on him, Harry sat the bound Quirrell down, hit him with an renervate charm, and leaned against the shattered mirror. The moment Voldemort awakened, he gazed upon his attacked and realized he had been caught. The fact that his attacker and captor was a young boy, scratch that, a young man who was well built and defined like a Muggle world-class athlete, was an embarrassment. Both individuals gazed on one another, one with red eyes, another with eyes of silver with flecks of jade green. But the boy looked like James Potter, a very young James Potter, but a Potter nonetheless. Taking a guess at his attacker, he spoke, "Harry Potter, we meet at last." Harry didn't move or even twitch as Voldemort hoped. In fact, with the young monk's posture, he looked not even 5 seconds from smashing his face in, if Harry Potter's emotionless face said anything. And he was right as quicker than his eyes could catch. Harry Potter, without touching him, somehow smashed his head into a table in front of Quirrell. As Harry conjured a chair from thin air and sat in the so-called Dark Lord's peripheral vision. Try as he might, his psychic probes couldn't penetrate the young monk's mental shields, no matter how hard he rammed them. To him, Harry Potter's mental shields were like steel. "You wanted my brother, but instead, I'm here. Why were you after my family, and why target my brother? Foolish boy, who says I want him? You were the one I attacked that night, not your brother." "I remember the one I attacked that night, though your eyes have changed, your face did not, at least much. Your brother who looks like your mudblood mother, was a mere weakling who cried while you who had a warrior look upon you, you who stood before me after killing your grandmother. Her sacrifice may have saved you then, Harry Potter. But it cannot save you now. Why? Impossible. What have you done to me? Why can I not leave this body?" Smirking, Harry looked into his eyes. He knew Voldemort would try escaping and or attempt at possessing him. Harry had been prepared for that as he placed his hand on his tunic and pulled up, showing an anti-possession rune tattooed on his chest, and then had an temporary until Harry removed it suppression rune on the back of Quirrell's neck. The rune made sure to suppress both Quirrell and Voldemort's magic as well as kept him pinned to Quirrell's body until Harry sent him to his grandfather Hades. "So, I'm the real boy who lived?" Dumbledore fumbled the ball. "And as for your question, the rune on me keeps me safe from possession. The rune on you and Quirrell makes sure you got nowhere to go. Until your anchors are gone, you're stuck as you are." Eyes wide with disbelief, Voldemort stuttered in, for what the witnesses outside the glass mirror could see for the first time on Voldemort's face, fear. You know?" "I do, and they'll be gone within the week. Then you and I are gonna take a journey. You made several very important people very angry with your splitting your soul stunt as well as the murders you committed and those you were responsible for. And the ones I represent, they're just itching to get their hands or should I say claws on you," Harry stated darkly and without emotion. Try as he might, even as to uselessly struggle in the binds keeping him tied down in the chair, and the snarling he was doing, it didn't do much as Harry rendered Voldemort unconscious with a glowing red fist to the left side of his face as he introduced Tom Riddle to a stunning right cross. He then grabbed the two-in-one body individuals by the left shoulder and flamed out. Moments later he returned. Try as they might, his family nor the head of the DMLE and her Aurors could get him to talk about where Quirrell, Voldemort, was. As it was, they realized he was untouchable lest they anger the moon goddess. But he did explain his plans on finishing the monster that Tom Riddle had become when the time came. James Potter, on the other hand, was reeling with the information that just presented itself straight from the Dark Lord's own mouth. Ever since Dumbledore claimed Charles as the boy who lived, they had pushed Harry to the sidelines. Now the truth was just revealed, and the weight of everything that had transpired since that night all those years ago had finally caught up to him. Amelia watched as the truth and its meaning took its toll on her old school friend as James slid against a wall he was leaning on as his mind went to war with itself. Shortly thereafter tears revealed themselves in his eyes as James Potter cried for the first time since his parents' death at Voldemort's hands. Harry watched as his father finally knew and understood the truth of what happened all those many years ago. It was then Harry also began to let some of his barriers fall as he watched his father pour out his emotions when the severity of the situation hit him. Harry approached his father and stuck his right hand out. James looked up and into his son's eyes and then the hand that was being offered as the room fell into silence. Taking his son's offered hand, James stood and stepped up to his son's personal space. Harry, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry, son. Harry didn't have to say anything as he saw James meant what he said as father and son embraced one another after so many years. As they exited the ministry, Harry was adamant that this didn't affect how Charles was to be treated. This time, both brothers were be treated as equals, to which James agreed. Later in the day, Harry, after retrieving his weapons before leaving the Ministry of Magic, had Amelia and his father James escorted him to Gringotts as his compass had showed him the location of another 2 horcruxes. Sirius was with them for the first since the compass showed a building he was very familiar with. Arriving earlier at number 12 Grimold Place, the locket of Salazar Slytherin was easily dispatched after Kreacher told Sirius the story of what happened to his brother Regulus and how Regulus had charged him with finding a way to destroy the locket. When Harry heard the story of his godfather's brother's sacrifice and death, he brought out the knife that he used to destroy the horcrux that tainted the diadem of Ravenclaw, held it out to Kreacher hilt first, and watched as the house elf of House Black finally avenged Regulus Black. The locket wasn't given a chance to fight back as the knife absorbed the soul fragment and dragged it to Hades' realm. Kreacher died with a smile on his face moments later after his last request from Regulus was completed. Sirius held the ancient elf in his arms, crying for the loss of his brother and the continuous courage that the elf of House Black showed in honoring his brother's last wish. Sirius took Kreacher's body to prepare it for burial in the Black family graveyard. Amelia wanted to go with him, but Sirius explained this was something he had to do alone. So it was that the next stop was Gringotts. Upon stepping up to the White Goblin established bank, Harry stopped and looked upon the guards that stood before the doors of the Goblin-run bank. Amelia and James, not knowing what was going on, could only stop to watch as Harry and the goblin guards with huge axes in their hands sized one another up before the goblins nodded in respect and pumped their fists to their chests and bowed, an action that Harry returned. One of the goblins ran into the bank and a minute later returned with whom Harry guessed was both the head of the bank and the goblin lord and king, Lord Ragnarok. Both in front and behind him was an honor guard to protect the king. The Goblin King looked upon Harry as Harry again did the same to Ragnarok. Both nodded to one another and repeated the pumps to their chests and bows. Welcome, son of the moon goddess and champion of the gods. I am Ragnarok, king of the goblins of Great Britain, and head of Gringotts. Would you do me the honor of following me to my office? From the looks of things, there is much we need to discuss. Well met, Lord Ragnarok. I am Harold, son of James and Lily Potter, blood-adopted son of Artemis, legacy of Zeus and Hades. I'd be honored to speak with you in your office. We do indeed have much to discuss. Hearing the truth in the young warrior archer's words, the Goblin King's eyes widened as the knowledge of the Potter family's heritage was revealed to him. Looking around, he realized that no one else outside of himself and those around him heard what was said as everyone else went about their business, not looking on what was going on. When he turned back, Harry said, "This conversation is for us only. I put up a privacy bubble wordlessly and wandlessly so as not to be overheard, my lord. I hope it's not too much trouble." "Not at all, my young demigod friend. Come, let us go inside." As they entered, the customer continued to not notice or hear and see the group that followed the Goblin King as they entered a room at the back of the building, meant for the king himself. As they sat, the Goblin King had refreshment brought in and they got down to business. He revealed to Ragnarok the quest he was charged with and the reason of the quest, and showed how the compass led him to the bank itself in search of the next horcrux. When he pulled out said compass, it showed a magical 3D map representation of the bank's internal structure. It zoomed to a specific location and then stopped on a vault where they saw a number, and then zoomed inward a few seconds later and an image of a cup was revealed. Ragnarok knew the number of the vault and the owners of said vault. In a rage he stood and demanded that the cup be brought forth and the vault locked down to be decided on an appropriate course of action to be discussed at a later date and time. A set of goblins within the office left the room to do as the Goblin Lord requested and almost 5 minutes later returned with a cup. Ragnarok ran a hand over said cup without touching it and felt the dark taint of one of their creations. Harry saw from what the compass told him that it was what they were searching for and pulled out his knife. The goblin guards almost thought Harry meant Ragnarok harm until they watched him pass the blackened knife hilt first to their king. When he raised an eyebrow in a silent question, Harry informed him that the knife was a gift from Lord Hades to dispatch the soul inside the goblin-made material. Ragnarok nodded in appreciation and understanding as he took and raised the knife over the cup and slammed it down blade tip first on the cup's internal structure. A black cloud rose and was then edged into the knife as it was sent on a one-way trip to hell. As it was, after handing the knife back to its owner, Harry informed Ragnarok of the coming war with Kronos and how the gods could use all the allies they could get behind them. Without having to think very long, Ragnarok stood and beat his left fist to his chest and declared that the goblins of any and all nations could and would answer the call to battle against any and all forces of Kronos. A pact in blood was established as a kinship between Harry and Ragnarok was witnessed by James Potter and Amelia Blackbones. After another hour had passed, the discussion of the vault, the Cup of Hufflepuff, as it became known, was found in. The vault had belonged to the Lestrange family, and since the contract between House Lestrange and Gringotts was revealed to have been violated by House Lestrange, the vault's contents was distributed between Harry Potter and Ragnarok, though Harry didn't do it for the money, just to see the end of Tom Riddle. But Ragnarok wouldn't hear of it and split the vault of Lestrange's contents 40-50, with Harry receiving the 40%, plus a few weapons, armors, and trinkets. The rest was given to Ragnarok himself once a new vault was opened to distribute Harry's new-found wealth and items in. Their deed for the day done, the trio of adults and demigod left with a huge weight lifted off their shoulders, and a new alliance in the battle against Kronos that was to come. When they returned home, James and Lily had decided to sit down and inform Harry that before he had ran away all those years ago, the marriage contract between him and Fleur Delacour had already been signed, making it ironclad. Harry of course knew of this as he was already informed by Hecate about the contract. He knew he couldn't get out of it unless Fleur was to lose her magic. As it was, Artemis and he had already visited the Delacour family who knew of Harry's status. Seeing that Fleur was part of a race of beings blessed by Aphrodite and a phoenix, in doing so, Velas were created. They agreed that Harry would accept the contract and that Fleur and he would have to try and see each other as equals. For several years, they had remained friends, and even grew to care for one another. Her Vela heritage finally accepted Harry as hers as his strength of character and purity of spirit had shown his true self. The fact that he was extremely well defined and powerful was a bonus. The Potters were glad that Harry accepted the contract, that Fleur Delacour and Harry were bonding, but now the real problem began. Harry didn't need training. On days when he wasn't busy, he returned to either searching for demigods and demigoddesses, or was training his body. Charles even decided to give physical training a try. At sunrise, when Harry was around, he and Charles, after creating a training regiment, were seen running all around the Potter property, which was extensive. Harry then later in the day would teach Charles how to throw a proper punch. When Harry found that Charles was not that strong physically, he put in a call to Hermes and see if the messenger god could send over some protein products and such so Charles could grow stronger. He also had James invest in gym equipment from weights, punching bags, treadmills, the works. Harry made sure that Charles also took his magical education serious, as when he was rested, Charles was taught both defensive and offensive magic. Harry also introduced his brother to magic that the British had dubbed borderline dark magic. When the Potters tried to object, Harry reminded them that Voldemort and his followers had years on them and that they had perfected their craft through torturing those weaker, both magically and mentally. That he and Charles would need every weapon they had at their disposal. When the Potters realized Harry spoke the truth, they sustained their objection. Later that night, before the brothers went to bed, Harry's compass began to buzz. Pulling it from his pocket, he opened it and the 3D map of Greater Britain came into view. The Potters watched as it zoomed towards a specific location until resting on a Victorian-style house. Upon closer inspection, James Potter gasped, "That's Lucius Malfoy's mansion. What's he doing with one of Voldemort's horcruxes?" When Harry looked up into his father's brown eyes with a dark look, and saw that Harry a look he was all too familiar with. A look he had when he looked upon his own reflection in the mirror when he was upset with dark thoughts. Harry about to end the life of a Malfoy, and there was nothing James could do to stop his son. Question was, did he want to? The Potters, Blacks, Lupins, Longbottoms, and Tonks all sat in the Potter living room while Harry waited on his friend to arrive. Harry put in a call for a favor owed to him when he saved the life of several of said individuals' sons and daughters. The messenger god known as Hermes informed Harry that if he ever needed a favor, to just call. Hermes racked up quite the favor count, especially when almost a dozen of his daughters joined the hunt, keeping Hermes from intimidating a few men who will be disappointed now that Hermes' daughters were now hunters of Artemis. It was late, close to midnight, as Harry was waiting by the fireplace, quiet and stoic, looking at the fire, feeling his connection to Hestia keeping him warm, secure, and strong. It was then that Harry was warned by a vibrating coin that let him know that Hermes was about to arrive, as he turned and informed everyone to close their eyes and turn their heads. As they did so, they all sensed the flash behind their eyelids as the Potter living room lit up. When the bright flash of light died down, they turned back to see a man in a dark blue suit reminiscent to that of a UPS deliveryman, but instead his uniform said Ops Delivery with the Ops insignia showing, inside of a blue helmet with what looked like wings attached to its background and gold name tag, with brown wavy hair and hazel eyes, standing at 6'1", with a possible weight of 220 pounds. Next to him was several dozens of boxes all stacked next to each other. "Harry, my man. How you been? You been eating good? You're looking good," he said as he took Harry's outstretched hand. "I'm good, Lord Hermes," Harry replied with a grin. Out of all the gods, Hermes was a father figure to Harry, while Apollo was like a big brother despite being his uncle and savior. Zeus being the grandfather and Hera his grandmother. Hermes turned around as Harry introduced him to his family. Once all the names were given and Hermes gave the Potters and Sirius Black a dressing down on how he didn't like what they did to Harry, but was willing to forgive them so long as they learned their lesson. Remus he rebuked for not trying hard enough to protect Harry, and despite his curse, there was still non-magic or muggle law that he could have used to fix the situation. Just because they lived in the magical world didn't mean they were above the law of Great Britain or its ruling monarch. Indeed, he then reminded everyone in the living room exactly whose land they lived on and who was really in charge of the country they lived in. Once the dressing down was over, Hermes turned to a silent Harry who watched and even agreed with what Hermes had said and did as he then looked at the adults and seen they'd been given a proper dressing down. Even if Hermes was a god, "Now Harry, I have the items you requested and Hecate assured me, they are resistant to magic destabilization. Now, I have here," he said, indicating a set of boxes that his hand rested upon, over 12 dozen miniature cameras that can mix in with any and all backgrounds, capable of not just video in color, but sound as well. Here, he indicated a box next to it, is a box that holds the latest in computer technology with the fastest speed available. It is protected against any and all viruses, and will help you record what your target is doing and saying with various visual and verbal programs for the cameras from X-ray to thermal heat imaging and night vision. If you need zooming action, it can do it with the cameras as well. You need to see instant 3D visual modeling, it can do that too. Next, is this baby. He pulled out a black case. Opening it up, he revealed what looked like a gun, gas-propelled magnetic grapple gun, capable of shooting over 500 feet before it loses speed and misses the target. It can attach itself to any metal surface, and with this, here he pulled out a belt, is the belt to use with the gun when needing to propel yourself to tight spots or getting out of tight and rough spots and situations. In another box, Hermes showed him a miniature crossbow the size of a Muggle handgun, with laser sightings and able to withstand the weight of up to 550 pounds. They had miniature arrows of various forms, from standard sharp arrowheads to tracking arrows, sleep potion dipped arrowheads, explosive heads powerful enough to pierce even the strongest magical shield, charm and metal armor, stunning arrows that can render a man unconscious as if he was hit with a fist, so long as the shot was well aimed and timed. There was also grappling arrowheads, and arrowheads capable of shattering glass due to a specific emitting sound wave setting. The last thing was a big black case filled with tracking devices. The tracking devices with visual capabilities, they were so small, it didn't matter where they were put, the target needing followed would never know he or she was being tracked, and their actions and words seen, heard, and recorded. Hermes then felt it was time to go, so with a hug to Harry and a stern glare at the adults, he began to shine, forcing everyone, Harry included, to turn away, and when they looked back, Hermes was gone. The last parting gift was a set of operational guides for the computers, cameras, tracking devices, and a bag of 100 drachmas and 100 galleons. For 2 days, Harry set up his equipment in his parents' study and then hopped all over magical Britain, installing his surveillance devices. Before he called in his favor with Hermes, Harry had spent a few days watching Lucius Malfoy and getting to know his habits and daily rituals. He'd kept a personal log as he kept to the shadows while watching his quarry, taking down names of known places and accomplices, people he was bribing with money, including the recently elected Minister of Magic of Great Britain, Cornelius Fudge. It seemed even the minister could be bought by Death Eaters, he thought to himself with a mental note to report this specific information to Amelia Blackbones. There was one woman that got on Harry's danger radar, so to speak, a toad of a woman with a cat fetish with a love for all things pink. So much so as to turn even Aphrodite off on the color of pink for a good long while. With his equipment now all over the areas Lucius visited, he then set up more of his cameras in the Ministry of Magic, from the minister's office to the senior undersecretary of Magic's office. Though he trusted her for being a just and honest woman, he even placed 2 cameras in Amelia Bones' office just in case. The entire upper levels and mid-levels of the ministry were now under Harry's watch. Harry's next objective was to slip a tracking device, a camera, and a listening device on Malfoy himself. Once done, if he observed the inner working of Malfoy's home, he could sneak in and retrieve the horcrux that Malfoy had on him. As it was, taking a cue from his Sherlock Holmes books, Harry disguised himself as a peasant one morning, dressed in dirty rags with makeup designed to make him look like a peasant, as well as a hat and fake scar tissue added to his face. The makeup to make him look dirty and a bit of garbage smell added to his clothes, and the scar tissue to make him unrecognizable. As he knew where the Malfoy Lord was going to be and when, the moment they collided into one another, his hands quickly went to work before Lucius knocked him down. "Pardon me, Governor, me many apologies," Harry said in an unidentifiable child-like tone of voice. "Ignorant wretch, watch where you're going, lest you wish to meet an unwanted end," Lucius sneered, swinging his cane back and striking Harry with it several times. Harry then noticed that Lucius had a silver snake's head for a handle on the cane, no doubt where his wand was hidden. Harry took the few blows until Malfoy saw that he had an audience from those who watched what he was doing, and then as he got himself together, he lowered the cane before he took another blow, about-faced to his left, and walked away, with his bleach-blonde hair swaying behind him. He never noticed that Harry not only bugged his clothing and robes, but his cane as well. With a wave of his fingers, Harry's last bit of bugs went into Malfoy's shoes' soles, where Lucius Malfoy would never know the difference. Harry made a show of dusting himself off and scurrying away in a panic, which he was actually looking for a place to flame teleport in secret to get home to Potter Manor. Lily and Amelia were at the computer when he arrived. After cleaning himself up, he came into the room to check on his progress. Days before, Harry and the women had gotten to studying the computer and software manuals until they were able to successfully use them. "Well, is it up?" Harry asked as he was using a towel to dry his hair, after showering, drying, and dressing into sweatpants and a white beater shirt, showing off his musculature body. "It's working. The entire area of Diagon Alley, Hogmeade Village, the Ministry of Magic, and even Hogwarts is now under your surveillance." Lily answered as she looked up and at him. She was wearing wire-rimmed glasses that made her cute in Harry's eyes, though for professional purposes, they were so she could equip herself to know what she needed to do when using the computer and electronic equipment. He blushed in good humor as he thought of his mother as cute. They had sat down personally the night before and finally got their differences out of the way, and Harry was allowed to fume his disappointment at her for her past behavior towards him. James didn't escape that session either, but in the long run, Harry did forgive them, but said he would not forget. They were being given a second chance, and they swore to make it worth it and not let Harry down. Finding himself standing behind her, he kissed the top of her head and hugged her neck and head, in which she leaned back and returned as she wrapped her arms around her son's head and kissed him on the right side of his head. Once they got that out of the way, they watched the computer monitors. Malfoy had just flew home to Malfoy Manor from the minister's office. For almost half an hour, the tracking device on Malfoy's cane had given not only his location, but the entire layout of wherever Lucius walked. But Harry and the women with him became very pissed and disgusted when one of the rooms Malfoy came upon with his son following him at his father's insistence, showed a room full of caged women in various states of undress with clothing torn and the women shackled, edging together in the left corner trying to get away from the head of House Malfoy and his heir. For what seemed like hours, but was only minutes, the Potter's son, Lady Potter, and Lady Black watched as Lucius Malfoy had tortured and raped the women in the cages with his son watching, and the collars they now were seen wearing with chains on them gave Harry enough reason to summon the one woman who needed to know. When Artemis arrived, she didn't arrive alone. Zoe and Phoebe was with her. Upon seeing Lily Potter, Artemis wanted to strike the woman, but Harry calmly stood in the way with his arms up and calming her down. He explained that he, Lily, and James had talked and all was forgiven, but that wasn't the reason he called her. He then showed them what he found in the house of Malfoy and thought she deserved to know. Her and the Huntress's gaze locked on the monitors and saw what the Lord of House Malfoy had done, and saw the heir standing back with a look of not knowing what to do while at the same time looking as if he saw turned him on, as if enjoying what his father showed him. Lucius later informed his son to remain quiet and not let their mother know what he had seen and his father had done. Harry explained how the tracking devices he placed on Lucius earlier in the week showed the location of not just the house, but the cages. The computer monitors showed the Lord and his son now sitting down to dinner with the matriarch of the family, Narcissa Malfoy Black. Harry then explained he had already thought of an appropriate plan: wait till midnight, sneak in, extract the girls, then go after Malfoy the first chance they got. Looking at his sister Huntresses, his plan then got even better as his mothers, sisters, and Lady Black saw his lips in a huge shit-eating grin. "He's smiling that smile again, Lady Artemis," Zoe said as she began to wonder what her brother's deranged mind was thinking. "I see that, Zoe," Artemis remarked as even she wondered what Harry was thinking. Phoebe rolled her eyes and smirked as she said, "It's never a good day for whoever he goes after when he smiles." That night, as the surveillance equipment showed the Malfoy family's lights were out, Harry, Artemis, and the two Huntresses quickly and silently in the cover of the darkened night, entered the house, destroying the wards protecting it, and freed the girls and got out in less than 3 minutes. Sensing several house elves within, Harry found and promised them to remove them from the house of Malfoy's servitude when the time was right with a trick taught to him by Lady Hecate. He just needed them to aid the Lord Malfoy one more time, but for now were to remain at the house of Malfoy until one of them was called at the right moment. He would later speak to the elves and see if they wanted to return or enter into a better symbiotic bond with him with the promise to treat them better, to which they were all too glad to hear, if their jumping for joy was anything to go by. The next day, he watched from the monitors as the Malfoy family raged as they found they had not only mysteriously lost their wards protecting their home, but also that none of them could figure out how, much to Harry's and his family's amusement. James, Remus, Sirius, Amelia, Lily, and Harry saw that wasn't the only reason. Lucius also fumed about his missing as he found his house wards damaged beyond repair. Artemis returned to inform her son that though he was too late to save the women's dignity, that they would not be able to join the hunt, he did make the right choice in sending them to her attention as Apollo did what he could to heal the physical damage, but she and he both thought it would be a good choice to remove the memories and experience they underwent so they could go on with their lives without nightmares once Harry's plan on Lucius' overdue punishment was enacted and finished with. Artemis promised all of the women that before altering their memories, that their kidnapper and torturer would pay with his life and that they would get a chance to have their vengeance. Harry wore a solemn look about the results of his not stopping Malfoy in time or saving the women, but Artemis, the Potters, Blacks, and Lupins made sure he knew that it was not his fault, that he was not to blame. When he finally accepted that, he then let everyone in on his next plan. 2 nights later in the dark of the night, the skies were clouded as the rain fell heavily. Lucius Malfoy was on what he liked to think his personal hunt. He still could not figure how anyone managed to bypass his wards let alone take off with his property. Right now, that didn't matter as his eyes came upon a tan-skinned beauty with dark golden blonde hair with a slim body wrapped in a tan coat that stood under a tarp, in front of an entrance of a pub. Putting his problems to the back of his mind, he came upon the girl and introduced himself. She smiled and held out her hand and introduced herself as Zoe. Putting on the act of charming his next victim, he kissed her hand and spoke a bit of French and then pulled out a muggle umbrella and raised it over their heads. Holding out his right arm, she took it as he began to walk away with her. Just as he was sure they were far enough from any muggles within a dark alley, he was about to apparate away with his next victim, that he almost failed to notice or sense the anti-apparition wards that were raised around him, until it was too late. Before he could register the shock of being caught, his left leg was yanked from under him as he fell to the ground. He was then raised within the sky shouting, or at least he knew he should have been. It seemed someone hit him with a silencing charm. Before he knew it, his rising journey came to an end, and he was yanked forward by the back of his head as he felt his hair was roughly fisted. Gazing into the eyes of his captor, he saw glowing green eyes, shining with power behind a dark mask and covered with a hood, the eyes glowing as if powered by the killing curse itself. His last thoughts before entering the realm of Morpheus was, "Oh, hell." Then Lucius Malfoy knew no more. "Wake up!" a loud voice demanded as Malfoy found himself being held by his throat with one arm. His captor he gazed upon was wearing what appeared to be some form of dark archer's attire complete with a hood and a mask that made his eyes shine. It was then Malfoy found his arms manacled and chained to his waist. Those chains and manacles are made of iron, the one metal that can disrupt magic, as well as the manacles having runes that have cut you off from your magic, so now would be a good time to scream. His captor said through clenched teeth in an angry snarl, with some form of a voice distortion charm to make his voice deep and unrecognizable. Lucius, hearing that his magic had been suppressed and that he was powerless, only sneered, "You won't drop me, you don't have it in you to kill me." "Wrong," came the answer as the dark archer let go of Malfoy's throat and Malfoy began to fall. Spinning and tumbling through the air, he failed to notice that he was falling in front of the clock tower of Great Britain. Of course his mind was only registering fear as he screamed, and his life flashing before his eyes. The ground started to get closer, and just as he thought it was about to die, he stopped mere centimeters from the ground, barely touching his nose's tip to the stone ground before he was quickly yanked up. He noticed that those who walked around didn't notice him falling, rising and/or him at all as he was raised upward by his left leg. When he was finally at the top again, he found himself right side up, and his throat once more in the archer's grip. He was then yanked towards the archer who had a look like he wanted to kill Lucius. As it was, Lucius was now truly scared and pissing himself. "Think I won't drop you now, Malfoy?" Lucius's eyes widened at the fact that this man not only knew what he was, but who he was as well. "You've been busy lately, Lord of Bad Faith. You've been kidnapping, raping, and torturing innocent women of magical and non-magical society as well as killing innocent men, women, and even children of the same station. That's one of the reasons I have you. The other is because you have something I want. An object belonging to your Dark Lord Voldemort, also known as Tom Marvolo Riddle. Give it to me, and I will not kill you." Or you? Mad, he will kill me if I give it to you." Malfoy stuttered, with bullets of sweat rolling down his forehead. "I'll kill you if you don't," came the reply in a louder tone. I'll need one of my house elves, to get it. Do it. But if I sense you giving an order for a house elf to bring harm upon me, I'll kill it, you, then your family. Yes, Lucius, even your son and heir, and your dear wife, Narcissa." The archer stated as he saw that Lucius saw his emotionless look within his eyes and face, and it was then that Lucius knew the threat was actually a promise. Nodding in defeat after seeing the archer's threat would be carried out as promised as the young man who held him by his throat was very dangerous, Lucius called, "Dobby." A sound of popping and a little creature with gray skin, big eyes and long floppy ears wearing what appeared to be a pillowcase with bruises and bandage-like wrappings on his hands and fingers. The creature looked wide-eyed at his soon-to-be ex-master's predicament. Dobby replied. Master Lucius called for Dobby. The healing elf asked in what was an appearance or act of fear for itself and its master. "Dobby, in my study is a diary belonging to Tom Riddle. Bring it to me." He managed to get out as the hold on his throat was lessened to allow air into his lungs. "Dobby get master's diary, Dobby get," the little elf said quickly, nodding its head several times, before he popped away quickly and a few moments later, he returned with the diary within his hands. Lucius and Dobby were both further shocked. The archer pointed at the diary and summoned it till it floated in midair in front of the small elf. Quicker than the eye could see, a knife hidden from both of their sights flew from the archer's hand and impaled itself into the diary beyond its cover. Both Malfoy and Dobby watched and heard an unearthly shrieking and barely saw what appeared to be a malevolent spirit ed into what seemed a black-bladed knife which then flew into the archer's still free and outstretched hand and disappeared into his side. With one part of this mission finished, the archer had decided to take care of one last problem: free him. He growled into Malfoy's face. Not needing to be told twice, Malfoy, though shackled, used his other hand to grasp the fingers of one of his gloves and pulled. When the glove was off, he threw it with enough force that he could have it land in Dobby's now outstretched hands. Dobby's eyes went wide as he then began to jump up and down in happiness. The archer then gave the small elf a set of instructions to wait for him to call him. Once the elf disappeared with a pop, the archer then turned to Lucius Malfoy and in a flash of flame, took him to his final destination. When awareness came to him again, Lucius Malfoy found himself next to his son, who was on his knees with his head bowed and eyes shut. They were in what appeared to be a tent of some kind, surrounded by angry women. A lot of the women he was very familiar with looks that said he was 3 cunt hairs away from dying if he even opened his mouth. Like his son, he was shackled, with his hands and arms bound behind his back. He then noticed that his own arms and hands were behind him as well, still shackled. Looking around, he noticed that the familiar women weren't the only women around. There were also women in various clothing that resembled Greek-like togas and silver-leaf-like tiaras, mostly silver, with bows out and some even notched with silver-tipped arrows, some with drawn knives. But the most distinguished feature was the look of loathing and need for something or someone to kill, that Lucius even feared thinking of. Turning to look in front of him, kneeling before a woman of middle age, was his captor with his head bowed, and in his hands was Lucius's cane that he presented to the woman. The throne appeared to be made of wood of some kind with various depictions of wolves, hunters, and other images. A wolf, with a black and gray coat, sitting next to her as if waiting on an order. The woman on the other hand had long dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, with flecks of silver, her eyes with silver irises. A silver bow and quiver full of arrows at her side, leaning against the throne, and a set of hunting knives on the other side, hanging from the arm of the chair. 2 girls on either side of her, both with tanned skin and dark hair, one of which was the girl named Zoe, who was to be his next victim. He swore mentally, if he got out of this, he'd make the women, including Zoe, pay. It just wasn't his lucky day, as he would in a few moments realize that his mental threat would not come to pass. "You've done well, my son. Please, stand next to your sisters while I deal with this murderous coward of immortal wizarding scum." The woman spoke as she took the cane and began to examine it with her eyes. As the archer did as ordered, the woman then took the head of the cane and pulled, revealing the wand within. She separated the wand from the silver snake head, and with a wave of her hand, reduced the silver into silver arrows that then floated into her quiver to join the other arrows. Interesting. Dragon heartstring, 11.5 inches, oak, if I'm not mistaken. Tell me, mortal wizard of bad faith. Here she looked back at the Lord Malfoy. Do you know who I am? In a show of defiance, he sneered and spat at the woman. Before the women surrounding him and her son could draw weapons and wands after gasping at the disrespect, the woman raised her hands, ordering the women to stand down. Even the archer had to relax his grip on his knife and resheathed it as it was almost free of its sheath. "Just some I will be more than happy to reduce to a mess of a by the time I'm done with you once I'm free." The woman could only giggle in a dark, mirthful tone as there were sounds of growling coming from everyone within the tent, including the wolves sitting beside the woman and those now standing with their looks of murder on their muzzles as their teeth were bared in menacing snarls. The woman rose and used the remainder of the cane to raise his chin. "I don't think so, mortal. As for who I am Artemis, goddess of the hunt, the moon, and childbirth, and you are in my domain." Lucius at first scoffed, but looking around and seeing the girls within, he was almost sold if not for the male that she called her son. He knew of the legends of the gods and doubted Artemis would break her oath of chastity. Artemis disappointed him as he said so, by informing him that the archer was her blood-adopted son who she loved dearly and on the same level as her hunters. She then waved her hand, and Lucius watched as his son was turned into a young jackalope with his binds disappearing at the same time. Lucius Malfoy knew it was said that Artemis was famous turning men into jackalopes and hunting them, and here he just witnessed his heir falling to her curse. It was then he began to be very afraid. Artemis had one of her hunters escort the young creature to a pin to join the rest of her turned humans. Shaking in fear, he watched as his son was led away, then turned back to the woman, no goddess. Lucius Malfoy, for the crimes of murder, torture, and rape in both the mundane and magical world, too numerous to be counted, you shall be turned into a jackalope. But unlike your son, you will be hunted, and you will die this very night. Once turned, I will give you a 5-minute head start. But it won't just be my hunters and I that will hunt you. You will be hunted by the women you have harmed as well. And the magical women can track you better since they have wands, and know how to use them, she stated with a feral grin. Before he could scream his protest, he felt the change as his bonds disappeared. His vision changing colors as his bones shifted until they met the criteria of the creature he now knew he became. Once the change was complete, he realized he could not feel his magic and then raged that she must have taken his magic from him. In a voice that was sweet, yet deadly serious, she said, "I'd start running if I were you, Malfoy." Suffice to say, at the end of the night, the house of Malfoy was no more as his head now adorned the walls of her wall of prized heads, stuffed and mounted. Back in Gringotts of Europe, the wealth of House Malfoy would be transferred to the vault of Artemis. Sirius Black would be informed via his godson of Lucius and Draco's plight and would be the one to inform his cousin and Lucius's wife Narcissa of her status as a widow and why. All the while she would be forced under the Black family head of house, which is Cyrus himself, not to say anything or do anything regarding Lucius's passing or her son Draco's permanent predicament. Meanwhile, in a pocket dimension, waiting on his captor, the shade of Tom Riddle would slightly feel the passing of one of his Death Eaters and would then begin to realize his time was indeed short. For Harry Potter, Artemison would continue his brother's training while waiting on the last location of the final horcrux to be revealed. The day after the end of Lucius Malfoy, and his heir's placement among other turned jackalopes of Lady Artemis, the Ministry of Magic was about to be purged of its dark taint. Harry observed through his surveillance devices as a one Delores Jane Umbridge attempted to negotiate a hit on a member of the Wizengamot through a suspected Death Eater. Alerting Amelia Blackbones, that plan was derailed as Delores and the Death Eater were apprehended outside of Dolores's office and arrested. Upon questioning of both individuals via truth serum, many things were found out about deaths that Delores was both a part of and responsible for in the Death Eater. One Lord Gregory Goyle Sr. of the ancient House of Goyle. Names were given and other suspected Death Eaters were sought out and captured, including those who escaped justice. When the Minister of Magic Cornelius Fudge tried to intervene, he was arrested when evidence was provided against him by Amelia showing how he had been accepting bribes for quite a while. For an entire week, magical Britain was left with no stone unturned as many families were found shamed by their heads of house as they lost much wealth and were left with stained reputations. Fudge was tried and moments later found guilty of accepting bribes, extortion, and aiding in the covering up information that prevented the apprehension and arresting of the criminals within the British magical world. He was sentenced to over 20 years in Azkaban. Delores was found to have caused and partake in over a dozen murders, tortures, and the wrongful passing of many laws against the many magical creatures of Great Britain, and possibly the world. Many family heads of magical Britain were interrogated, then tried, and convicted for their own crimes including aiding and abetting the Dark Lord Voldemort. Of course, a certain journalist of the Daily Prophet was given privileged information on the so-called Dark Lord and his true identity. Tom Marvolo Riddle was a name that was no longer feared as many a magical citizen who were victims themselves were now informed of the truth and struck back at both Riddle's name and his moniker as they even had relatives who were victims of Riddle's rise of terror. They had come together and had called for the heads of his followers, but were satisfied with the knowledge that those who escaped justice were kissed by the creatures of Azkaban called Dementors. Of course, once magical Britain was cleansed of its criminals within their society, the Dementors disappeared. There were investigations into the Dark Soulers' disappearance, but as it was, there were no signs shown of foul play because there was no trace of them whatsoever. Only a handful of people would know, and they wouldn't talk or speak of the Dementors' fate. Fenrir Greyback was found unconscious within the Ministry of Magic, bound and gagged with a set of silver arrows piercing both of his shoulders and hands, which left him stapled above the Wizengamot doors. Due to the Dementors' disappearance, it seemed the murderous werewolf was deemed too dangerous to live, even in Azkaban since it was now staffed with competent human and goblin guards. So Fenrir Greyback was sentenced to the Vale of Death, where he was thrown in with many of his victims watching as his muzzled hide was sent through. During that time, as the darkness of the night arrived, Harry had found the location of the last two horcruxes. The location of one of them was found within the Gaunt shack that had been deemed to be too dangerous to enter, so after a quick prayer to his grandfather Zeus, the House of Gaunt was reduced to rubble due to a lightning bolt. Once it was safe to sift through the rubble, Harry had found and retrieved a wooden box that had been buried beneath some floorboards. He, Sirius, James, and Lily found many enchantments on said box. A few minutes later, they had succeeded in removing the enchantments, and opened the wooden contraption. Inside was a ring with several compulsion charms and curses on it, including a flesh-eating curse. Before his parents and godfather could be tempted by the ring, Harry quickly pulled out his knife and stabbed it. The adults stepped back when Harry's knife was drawn and came down on the ring. The moment it shrieked, it was also silenced as the soul shard inside the ring was edged into the black Stygian blade. Harry banished the ring itself, but retrieved what had been fused to the ring. A black stone laid in his gloved hand, to which the adults did not miss. I'd like to introduce to all three of you, the Resurrection Stone, the final and most dangerous Hallow. Before the Potters and Sirius could say anything, Harry summoned a small, lead-based sack, dropped the stone in it, and tied it shut. After placing it in his pocket, he then grabbed his parents and Sirius and teleported them to the outside of the House of Riddle. Unstrapping his bow, he ordered Sirius to change to his grim form and sniff around. It didn't take long as a yip was heard moments after Sirius disappeared within the darkness. A second later, the Grim was running back in their direction as if the hounds of hell was chasing it. A giant python-like snake, unnatural for its size and with unnatural speed, quickly came slithering out of its hiding place. A set of silver arrows was quickly set upon it and pinned it in several places from several parts of its long body. The arrows were so strong as to ensure the snake couldn't escape. Harry released another arrow near its head, ensuring that his father wouldn't miss when he successfully destroyed it. Unsheathing his knife, he passed his knife to his father, who was all too happy to end the serpent permanently. As James returned the knife to Harry, the demigod looked to a now shaken Sirius. "You okay, Padfoot?" Sirius looked up as his marauder name did not come from James' lips, but from his godson's. Nodding, he chuckled, "Yeah, that was one big snake." Harry smiled, "Not big enough. Tomorrow, I'm going after Salazar's snake, have her resume her duties as a protector of Hogwarts." James, Lily, and Sirius went wide-eyed as Harry explained that the legendary serpent of Salazar Slytherin was indeed real, and that Tom Riddle used strong magic to bind the creature to him after finding the Chamber of Secrets. Before they objected, Harry assured them she would remain harmless to humans unless they tried to bring harm to the students and/or Hogwarts grounds. The Acromantula within the Forbidden Forest though had to go, and since basilisks are natural enemies of the giant spiders, it's only right that the great serpent itself end the threat before the giant spiders harm an innocent. Once Harry was done explaining, he then knelt and prayed to Hades, who appeared before the Potters and Sirius. He then flame teleported away to retrieve Quirinus' quarrel with Tom Riddle on the back of his head. Once Harry returned with his prisoner, Hades called forth his Furies, who then jumped the bound wizard and parasitic Dark Lord, eagerly sending both individuals to their punishments in Hades' realm. Looking upon his grandson, who now knelt before him along with the Potters in black, Hades smiled, "Rise, grandson, rise. You as well, James, Lillian, and Sirius. You have done me proud, grandson. You no longer need the compass," Hades said as he gestured for Harry to hand it over. Harry, after rising, unstrapped the compass from his belt and handed it over. He further surprised Hades when he also handed over the Elder Wand and the Resurrection Stone. "Well, this is a surprise," the Lord of the Underworld said as he examined both items in his hands. Curling both items in his fist after confirming their authenticity, they were both reduced to ashes and absorbed into Hades' being. Harry then handed over his knife, to which Hades declined. Instead he ran his hand over the blade, ensuring that it was now safe to use against immortal and mortal beings and creatures with evil purposes. Once that was done, Hades smiled at Harry, as he looked upon one of his favored grandchildren. "I'm proud of you, Harry, you've done me proud, but I have a mission that I have need of you to take care of for me before the son of your uncle Poseidon and daughter of your other grandfather Zeus, and Athena's daughter are sent to retrieve my children. Before Zeus, myself, and Poseidon made the oath to not father any more children during World War II, I had another set of children, a daughter named Bianca D'Angelo and her younger brother Nico. Zeus tried to kill them, but only succeeded in killing their mother, whereas I had Alecto take them to the lair of the Lotus Eaters that is now located in Las Vegas. They were recently relocated to a school called Westover Hall in Bar Harbor, Maine." James looked at his wife and his best friend, who saw what James wanted to do, and nodded. He then stepped forward and knelt before Hades and bowed his head. The Lord of the Underworld turned to him with a questioning look. "Grandfather, I ask that you let me and my friends, the Marauders, aid Harry in this endeavor. Let us earn your forgiveness and the chance to redeem ourselves." Hades looked to Harry, who nodded in support, then back to James. "Very well. But know this, you may have dealt with vampires, werewolves, and dark wizards and witches, but you have nothing against dealing with monsters. If you come across one, don't hold back with any destructive curses against them, because they won't hesitate to kill you." "Harry," Hades turned back to his favored grandson, "rest for 2 days, then begin the assignment. Artemis will most likely be there upon arrival. If so, and Bianca chooses to go with Artemis, I want you to take Nico as your apprentice and teach him everything you know concerning combat. Do you think you can do that?" Harry nodded with an affirmative look upon his face. He had been training his brother Charlie to the point where his brother wound up finding his own animagus form of a lion. Harry hadn't ever been so proud of his brother, unlike when he also shifted into his animagus form of a black panther. Lily, seeing her sons wrestling each other in good fun, decided to prank her husband, Sirius, and Remus through her sons' animal-based forms. The night before, as James and the others came home from a good night's work at their offices within the Ministry and Remus from his within a bookstore Lily and he co-owned and ran together, the legendary Marauders were then given a surprise that left them with wet and stained pants and underwear. Amelia, of course, was a part of the prank and made copies of the pictures that Lily took. Suffice to say, the Marauders were able to add 2 new members to its growing family, even though they couldn't look their friends and co-workers in the eyes afterward. Harry, of course, sent the image of the events to his adopted mother, sisters, and grandparents, who shared the visual images with the entire Olympian Council. Even Hades was sent a copy of the Marauders being scared shitless in every meaning of the word, leaving Persephone and Hades giving the underworld something it rarely ever hears: laughter. Harry introduced his parents and brother that day to a martial arts dojo and instructed them that once his quest was over, to make sure Charlie and Rose was sent there to learn self-defense, and that it wouldn't hurt to have themselves and the other families to learn martial arts as well. The day after Riddle's End, Lily awoke to find Rose's crib empty. Panicking, she ran out of her room with a light blue robe around her. Before she could cry out, the moment she ran down the flight of stairs and was halfway down, she gazed upon a scene that left her eyes full of tears. But they weren't tears of pain or loss, but of joy. Within the main hallway of the first floor of Potter Manor, baby Rose was on her hands and knees, wobbling over to her elder brother, who was walking on his hands upside down and smiling at her. Harry was wearing gray sweatpants and a white t-shirt that was tucked into the sweatpants. Rose followed her brother as he kept encouraging her to follow him through funny facial expressions. She laughed at his antics and funny faces he made, tempting her to follow him as he led her around in a small circle. Lily sat on the flight of stairs, smiling in relief and amusements, watching the sibling pair have their fun. She knew Harry would protect his siblings through any means necessary. In a weird way, she was almost tempted to have Harry talk to the moon goddess about Rose joining Artemis when she got older, but she didn't think she could be separated from her daughter for long periods of time. In the middle of the day, the Potters were summoned to the Ministry as Albus Dumbledore wanted to see them before he was sent to Azkaban. Harry in his archer's attire followed his parents as they arrived. It was a weak yet bound old man they came upon as he sat on a cot awaiting his coming escort to the prison. "James, Lily," the old man acknowledged, then turned towards the Potter he liked least and did not want to see. "What is he doing here? I didn't want him here." "He's here because he has something to say to you, but we'll hear what you have to say first," James said, gazing upon the ruined man. All of Albus Dumbledore's history was revealed to the world, showing the truth that painted him as a Dark Lord in shepherd's clothing. His relationship with Gellert Grindelwald, his sister's murder due to a duel between him, his brother Aberforth, and Gellert, his father's crimes, and other things, including having made Tom Riddle into Voldemort when he wanted to be seen as the next Merlin and was losing popularity. Even a personal interview with Gellert Grindelwald himself showed all of the older Dumbledore's dark skeletons that was in his closet, so to speak. Turning to the head of House Potter, Albus Dumbledore attempted to try and convince James to help him reverse what was done, as he was under the impression that Voldemort was still alive until Harry stepped in and revealed the truth. Harry revealed only what was necessary about Voldemort's downfall and how they ended it quicker than he ever could and did. In the end, the old man begged James to reconsider, but it was useless as James, Lily, And Harry refused to listen and only walked away as the old wizard was crying out and claiming Harry was lying and that he knew best. But his words and cries fell on deaf ears as Albus Dumbledore was stunned and moments later, on his way to Azkaban, where he would not survive the first week. He would be found in his cell within his 4th day in the prison, dead due to heart failure. The day of going after the D'Angelo siblings came as Amelia Blackbones, the Tonks, the Longbottoms, and the Weasleys, who was finally able to see the truth of Dumbledore's manipulations, came to watch over Charles Sirius Potter and Rose Potter while Lily wished her husband and son the best. Amelia did the same for Sirius, as did Remus' wife. Having scouted the school on the last day of his rest, Harry stuck out his right hand, in which James, Sirius, and Remus, all wearing basilisk battle-wizarding robes. James had the Potterhouse crests on his, with Sirius and Moony bearing the black crests, as well as all 3 bearing a crest that Lily designed showing the Marauders' animagus forms on the area above the heart: a stag, a grim, a wolf, a tiger, a black panther, and a lion. Harry too had the same crest of the crest on his archer's attire above his heart, but his was slightly altered with the symbol of the moon for a background. A second later, all 4 individuals disappeared in flames. Bar Harbor, Maine. Harry and the Marauders appeared outside the school called Westover Hall. The Marauders took their first real look and marveled at the skill it took to build a place resembling a castle. Harry had the Marauders follow him as he stuck to the shadows, bypassing the school's staff while the adults used disillusionment charms to hide themselves, along with soundproofing their boots and suppressing their scent in case a monster was nearby. The school's student population inside the gymnasium was huge. There were many kids in various states of dress who were also dancing to music that James, Sirius, and Remus were very unfamiliar with. Harry recognized a certain satyr that was watching over a set of kids in a certain part of the gym. Harry held up his right hand, signaling for the Marauders to hold up. He turned to them as the disillusionment spell came off, as well as the other spelled, and had them huddle as close as possible and asked Sirius to shift into his dog form and for Remus to keep his senses open for any scent that didn't smell human. Since Remus recognized what scent to keep his nose open for concerning demigods because of Harry's blood, he would know who the demigods were. Harry pointed to the kids that Grover's eyes fell on as he wanted Sirius and the Remus to head over and meet and protect the children without seeming inconspicuous. When Remus and Sirius headed out, Harry had James follow him. Coming behind the satyr stealthily, Harry quickly used his right hand to cover the satyr's mouth and the other arm around his neck to pull him back, pinning the satyr to a matted wall. Harry looked his friend in the eyes and smiled after using his right index finger over his lips, telling the satyr to remain silent. "Harry," Grover Underwood whispered in shock as Harry pulled his darkened hood back some so that Grover could confirm his identity. Harry continued smiling and nodded an affirmative. James pulled out his wand and cast a Notice Me Not charm around Harry, Grover, and himself, as well as a magical dome where Harry and his satyr friend could speak and hear each other. "Grover, good to see you, bro." Grover latched onto Harry and hugged him roughly. Grover was dark skin tone to allow people to mistake him for an African American, even though he really was a satyr. He was dressed in casual clothing of a red cap to conceal his horns that grew past his curly brown hair, baggy jeans, and sneakers with fake feet to cover his true furry legs and hooves, a black t-shirt that said Westover Hall. Grunt. Once Harry introduced James, Harry had Grover debrief him as James kept a lookout for Remus and Sirius. Grover informed him that one Percy Jackson, Annabeth Chase, and Talia Grace were already on their way. Grover informed him that he smelt a monster nearby, but a tap from James who brought down his charms showed Remus barreling up to them without Sirius. He informed him that he and Sirius had met the kids and Sirius was protecting them after Remus placed what spells he could on them to ensure their safety. But his inner wolf both felt and smelt the monster nearby in the form of one of the school's faculty members. Not needing to be told twice, Harry instructed Grover to find out if the other demigods had arrived and get them to the gym fast. Harry had James go and watch over the kids and Sirius while he used Remus to help him identify the monster. It didn't take long as Harry was nudged by Moony's elbow signifying which teacher did not belong and did not smell like a human. Harry looked as the person of interest was dressed in black military-style uniforms with red trims, clean-shaven, short, crew-cut, trimmed graying hair. He and a woman dressed just like him exited the gym for a moment. As Harry followed, Remus was ordered to join James as his pseudo-nephew stalked after his prey. In the shortest time Remus and his inner wolf, Moony, had reacquainted themselves with their cub. Even in his wolf form, Moony bowed to Harry as the alpha of the pack and swore allegiance in the only way it knew how as it bared its neck in submission. At the time Harry's animagus form, Panthro, met the wolf at the last full moon. The name was taken from a Muggle cartoon series Harry had come to learn of during his time in the States. What the Potters learned when Harry began his plans against Lucius Malfoy was that Harry was also a metamorph magus, like the Tonk's elder daughter, Nymphadora, which is why Harry assumed the size of a full-grown adult when he took down the so-called Dark Lord's right-hand man and Fun's backer. Harry watched his current quarry while within the shadows as the faculty found and came upon the daughter of Zeus, son of Poseidon, and daughter of Athena. Talia used the mist to influence the female faculty member, Ms. Gotchick, into thinking they were students. The monster faculty member, Dr. Thorne, began to act his part well as he asked Ms. Gotchick if she knew the students. Harry took out a copper metal Zippo lighter and began using Morse code, signaling to Annabeth Chase who he was and that he was nearby and watching. Annabeth had met Harry several times in the past, and thanked him those many times when he brought her new sisters and brothers to Camp Half-Blood. Annabeth's eyes widened for only half a second after watching the Morse code before she gave one nod in understanding. Ending the Morse talk, Harry stealthily returned to the gym to wait on them as Grover had just passed where he stood. Moments later, Annabeth and the others found themselves in the gym, where Grover and Talia began to dance. Annabeth lured Percy over to Harry. While he had waited on their return, James used a special earpiece Lily charmed to act like a walkie-talkie earpiece, and explained that Hades' kids resembled their family tremendously when it came to looks and hair. Harry chuckled and replied that he already knew having spotted them earlier. "Harry, what are you doing here?" Annabeth asked in a low tone, pulling Percy Jackson behind her. She let go of Percy to give Harry a hug, which he returned. "My job, little sister, right now. The kids are safe. It's these other kids I'm worried about with Dr. Thorne on the loose." "What do you mean?" she asked after unwrapping herself from Harry's neck. "I brought backup in the form of my father, godfather, and uncle. They're with the kids and are about to initiate a quick getaway with them on my signal. Since the castle obviously has no wards to speak of, the plan is to get the kids outside. Mom is either on her way or is already here. As for Dr. Thorne, Remus's inner wolf, Moony, has confirmed that Dr. Thorne is not human in any meaning of the word." "Brilliant plan. Oh, this is Percy Jackson. Pleasure to meet you, cousin," Harry said as he held out his hand, which Percy took as Annabeth introduced Harry to the son of the sea god. Harry's eyes of course wasn't looking at him at all as it rested on Thorne the entire time, who looked back and forth at him and his present company and the marauders who were with his two targets. Using the Zippo, Harry signaled James to begin Plan A. James nodded and a moment later, the children of the underworld disappeared with a small pop alongside a now human Sirius and Remus. "I see you made up with them. Your family I mean," Annabeth stated. "Yep, it's time to go though, Thorne is pissed," Harry said as Thorne looked around, and when he saw his own mission was a bust, he turned to Harry with a snarl. Grover and Talia came up to Annabeth, Percy, and Harry. Before they could say anything, Annabeth grabbed one of Harry's shoulder while Grover grabbed on an outstretched hand that latched onto Talia and the other hand latched onto Percy. In a flash of flames, the four demigods and satyr were standing next to the marauders outside the castle in the cool night. Harry of course disengaged himself from them and flashed out again, though before James shouted for his son to stop. Harry reappeared behind the angry monster inside the gymnasium as he pushed his way through the kids within as Harry notched a silver arrow quickly and brought up the now unhidden bow, pulled, and released the arrow into the false human's cranium. When the arrow connected with the creature's skull, all that was heard was, "Oh, bugger." A moment later, and the monster turned to golden dust. A few minutes later, and with the mist aiding him, nobody in the school was any the wiser about there ever being a Dr. Thorne or ever seeing Harry within the school, period. The dance went on as if nothing happened. When Harry was satisfied, he flamed back to the marauders and the others. James rushed to his son to check him over, but an outstretched arm signifying him to stop, showed he was fine and unharmed. James instead hugged his son close, as did Sirius and Remus, much to Annabeth's amusement. Talia Grace then came up and demanded to know who he was. She was sporting a gothic look with black hair and wearing punk clothing, much like the sons and daughters of Ares. Black leather jacket, black jeans, and a Green Day shirt underneath. In one of her arms was a shield modeled after Zeus' shield, called an aegis. It held an image of Medusa, that many had known to shy or run away from or not look at in fear. Clearly a gift from Athena. In her other arm was a celestial bronze spear crackling with electricity. Annabeth came between them and introduced Talia to Harry as a son of Artemis, though she and Percy was skeptical at first, but the second she did, the loud clear sound of a hunting horn was heard. Harry had heard the hunting horn, signifying his mother, the goddess Artemis' arrival. Before his eyes could look upon the arriving female hunters, his ears alerted him to a new sound. There was a thunderous noise and a blaze of light from behind the entire group. Harry and the others turned as a sleek black military-style gunship helicopter appeared from out of a cloud of mist. It had attachments on the side that looked like laser-guided rockets. The helicopters had to be manned by normal mortals. This left Harry and undoubtedly the others, wondering what it was doing there. How could mortals be working with a monster? The searchlights was almost upon Harry if not for his quick thinking, and snapped his wrist-based crossbow up and pointed towards the main windshield well beneath the chopper's blades. Upon release, the arrow flew and penetrated the left windshield. When the arrow finished its travel, the others looked as the arrow was in fact connected to metal cord that then pulled Harry up with it. He flew straight and true, putting his head down and lighting his hands on fire as he crashed through the windshield. Down below, James Potter, Remus Lupin, Sirius Black, the demigods and Satyr watched for a few moments as the chopper began spinning and flying out of control. James stepped forth as if to do something as his wand was in his hand, when the chopper leveled out and slowly lowered with its wheels coming out, and finally landed. Its rotor blades began to slow with the powering down of its engines. Harry, cut and bleeding, stepped out of the pilot's side and opened the middle doors, revealing two male bodies, alive, but unconscious. Harry James Potter, do you realize how close I wound up having a heart attack, with you pulling that stunt? James cried out as he pulled Harry into his arms for a few moments, with Sirius and Remus walking up to them in worry, though allowing James to embrace his son. They then got James' attention and showed his son's bleeding arms and wrists, with some pieces of glass in several areas of both arms. Thankfully, James knew the importance of the ambrosia Harry had on hand as he cast healing charms on his son's wounds while Harry ate a broken piece of said ambrosia. This was a scene Artemis and her hunters were coming upon as James was healing his son, despite Harry now letting James know he was fine. "Father, I'm fine, see, all healed," he said as James finished examining his son's arms. A chuckle from the goddess and her huntresses caught the spectators' attention. "Are we interrupting anything, my son?" the hunter goddess asked with a smirk, clearly amused at the situation. Using her teen form, of which she preferred, her auburn hair was gathered back in a ponytail with silvery eyes, like that of the moon. Like her hunters, she was dressed in silvery parkas and jeans, while armed with bows, arrows, and knives. "No mom, I'm good. Just pulled a Batman maneuver with my new magnetic grappling crossbow. And I must say, Uncle Hermes sure knew how to get me all of the coolest toys. I told thee he's watched too much of the Batman movie, my lady," Zoe Nightshade stated with a fake dramatic roll of her eyes and a fake sigh. "Sadly, I must agree, Zoe my old friend," Artemis dramatically said in an exasperated tone with a hand to her left over her heart, and then began to laugh with her lieutenant huntress. "Oh great, it's Artemis and her huntresses," Talia Grace murmured to Percy as she turned with her hand on her hips. Though he gave her a stern look, Harry just got an ugly one in return. Artemis merely brushed her half-sister's attitude away as she looked at her son with fondness, then turned to the female Diangelo, Bianca, with a look of curiosity. The young Nico Diangelo came up to Harry. "That was awesome what you did. What is that thing anyway?" he asked, looking at the powered-down chopper. Harry looked down and smiled as he introduced himself to Nico and put his left arm over his shoulder, walking over to the now inert gunship as Harry explained the mechanics of the aerial vehicle and what its uses were. Artemis took this moment to pull Bianca off to the side while also instructing her hunters to set up tents for the night. Remus and Sirius decided to get on home while James would remain behind. They pulled out their own set of port keys and disappeared after giving Harry and the others a smile as well as a bow to the goddess Artemis. Artemis of course returned the respect in kind before they left. When Harry finished explaining the chopper capabilities, James came up beside Harry and Nico while examining the helicopter. You know, given enough time, Sirius, Remus, and I could make this work with magic as well, do some major magical refinements," James said. Harry took another look, and saw the potential in the idea his father had. Both father and son only smiled the same creepy smile at each other, the same that spoke of something crazy, yet sinister was going through their minds. Harry nodded as James smiled back, with a wave of his wand, shrank the chopper and pocketed it. The demigods minus Annabeth and the satyr known as Grover Underwood were shocked upon witnessing such magic as James then turned to Harry and Nico and promised to keep in touch. After embracing Harry one last time, ruffled Nico's hair and reaching into his robes, pulled out a stone and disappeared into thin air. Annabeth and Grover came upon Harry with Talia and Percy trailing behind slightly. "Hey Hunter boy, when were you going to tell me you were in town?" Annabeth asked as she ran up to and embraced her old friend. Harry returned the hug in kind, pulling Annabeth into a strong yet firm hug. "Hey Annie, sorry I haven't kept in touch, but I have been busy, but you should be happy to know Voldemort's gone forever. It seems he made some serious bad decisions in cheating death by cutting off pieces of his soul and placing them in ancient magical artifacts and whatnot. Mother and Uncle Hades had me search all of Great Britain for these objects and destroyed them, becoming a lord of various family houses at the same time. Even went so far as to ruin his followers financially." Annabeth laughed out loud at that as she smacked her hand into Harry's raised one. It was then a set of feminine arms wrapped around Harry's waist, followed by a kiss on his right cheek. "Fleur, how's the training going?" Harry asked without looking back. "Well enough, Mon Ami. I've missed you, as has Gabrielle," Fleur answered. Harry turned to Fleur as his lips captured her own. After a moment, Harry and Fleur Delacour pulled apart as Fleur allowed Harry to examine her. Her body well-toned and ripped with a muscular four-pack for a young woman of her age. Her outfit was similar to his own, save for the fact that it was in gray and silver camouflage style, as was her bow. It hid a bit of her feminine features, yet looked damn why on her. She had as many knives and daggers as he did on both her waist and arms, with a magically enchanted quiver on never-ending arrows on her back, that Harry used a never-ending charm on for her. "I love the outfit. Has Gabriel made a decision about my mother's offer yet?" he asked cheekily. A shadowed, yet small body tackled Harry from his left. "What do you think, husband?" Fleur laughed at seeing Harry caught so unaware as he fell to the right. He turned as a smaller yet virtual copy of his fiancée straddled his chest, her silvery hair flowing to and over her left shoulder, her costume similar to his and her sister's own. Yet hers was a light brown. "Ello big broser," she said as she leaned down to hug his neck and then kiss both of his cheeks. Harry then picked her up as he sat up and began to tickle her sides, forcing her to squeal in loud giggles. "Lady Artemis has informed me and our parents that when she's a little older, she may join should she accept the offer, but for now, since she's still young," Fleur explained, leaving the answer up in the air with a shrug. Harry was astounded that Fleur's accent had improved to a great degree since they first bonded. Harry then introduced his fiancée and soon-to-be sister-in-law to Annabeth and Talia, the latter who seemed to sneer at his fiancée. Harry looked at Percy, Grover, and Nico as it seemed the allure the sister Vila had begun to affect their minds. All three males were drooling while staring until Harry cleared his throat, alerting the Vilas to the males' facial expressions. Annabeth queried to the problem until Fleur explained Vilas and their allure. Annabeth understood as the Vila attempted to lower the allure, allowing Talia to smack Percy and Grover in the back of the head as Harry snapped his fingers in front of Nico several times, in doing so helped get the two males and satyrs' minds straight. Harry's sister Zoe Nightshade, lieutenant of Artemis, stepped up next to the group of teens and satyr. "Lady Artemis will see all of you now. Harry, before we go, since Bianca has accepted my lady's offer, what will become of young Nico?" Harry pulled her to the side and answered her softly, "I got a visit from grandfather Hades, they're his. Apparently they've been in the Lotus for close to 70 years with no memories of their past. I've decided that if Bianca joins Mother's hunt, I'll take Nico as an apprentice. He'll remain with me, this way, he will see Bianca every chance he gets when we visit." He saw he lost her at the Children of Hades bit for a few moments as he waved his hand in front of her face, when her mind came back into focus. "Huh? Hades' children?" she asked with a pale face. Harry nodded. "Please sis, they're innocent and have been out of touch with the world for almost 70 years with bits and pieces of their memory missing. They deserve the benefit of the doubt," he pleaded. Zoe nodded and then sighed as she placed her hands on her hips. She took a look between her lady's tent and then took a look at Nico. Turning back to Harry, she said, "Okay. He's your responsibility, you make sure he knows the rules. I'll be right back as I'm going to speak to my lady real quick about the new circumstances. Let them know to hold back a moment." He nodded as she left to speak to the moon goddess about Bianca and Nico as Harry informed the group about a new set of revelations that was revealed. When Annabeth, Percy, and Talia asked about the revelations, Harry asked them to be patient as he didn't have the clearance to inform them of said revelations just yet. He stepped up to Fleur and intertwined his left hand with her right. "How is it you're engaged?" "You're about the same age as Percy, Annabeth, and I," Talia asked. "Well, it's a long story, but suffice it to say, Fleur, Gabrielle, and I are from a society of wizards and witches whom have been around for centuries. We're born with magical cores. My family's been around since the time of Merlin and have intermarried into individual family with different names, some which are no longer around. Currently, my patriarchal family's name is Potter. At one point in time, we were Gryffindors, Peverells, and now Potters. Godric Gryffindor was a son of Zeus, and my ancestor Ignatus Peverell was a son of Hades. I am a legacy of both as well as an blood-adopted son of Artemis." Anyway, he sighed to continued. "Fleur and Gabrielle's family had a marriage contract with mine for me through mine and Fleur parents. It was a magically binding contract, so we couldn't get out of it. But when I ran away from my family and eventually became Lady Artemis' son, we talked a bit since Lady Hecate said that since it was a magically binding contract, even she couldn't break it unless I hurt Fleur or even myself by sacrificing our magic, maybe even our lives. To Velas because of their common ancestry, I couldn't do that. So I accepted it, and with my mother and Lady Hecate at my side and giving me their support, we met up with Fleur and her family. Fleur took over, with that, Harry as Lady Artemis' son and the strength he possessed as a champion of magic and of Z-gods. My Vela heritage found Harry to be my mate. In fact, magically speaking, we're already married. But legally is another story." "Wait, what do you mean Vela heritage?" Percy asked. "Well, centuries ago, Lady Aphrodite and a phoenix mated when the love goddess assumed an avian form, creating the Velas. By magic and nature, Velas are UAL beings." Harry explained with a blush on his cheeks. It took a moment before Annabeth got the idea when she looked between Harry and Fleur. Oh, you mean, you and her." Now even Fleur was blushing as she and Harry were looked at each other. "Yes, we're bonded, but Fleur, only after her magic and Vela heritage recognized me as a perfect mate, and my magic recognized her as a perfect mate. She and I are soulmates in every meaning of the word." "So, you've?" Percy asked as he finally got it along with Grover and Talia. Covering Nico's ears much to his protests, Harry looked at the others minus Fleur and Gabrielle. "Yes, in order to seal our bond, Fleur and I did have. Magic has acknowledged us as a married couple, and I tell you, I haven't had a reason to regret that decision." He finished, taking his wife into his arms and snogging her senseless. Gabrielle jumped up and down in happiness until she suddenly looked at Nico, who looked at her in return. Harry and Fleur's abilities in sensing magic at work came into play as they saw and felt as Gabrielle's magic call out to Nico as he began to walk up to her, and she, him. A bond then activated with the touching of not just their hands, but their lips, a glow surrounding them both. Both looked at the young demigod and young Vela, then each other. "Oh boy," Harry said with a look of shock. Fleur agreed with a nod. "Merde, looks like I'm going to have to disappoint Mom," Harry muttered as he saw Zoe return. She stopped as she saw the golden magical glow. "Oh, not good." She looked to Harry. "My lady's going to be disappointed." Like Harry and Fleur, she knew what the glow meant. "My Lady Artemis would like to see all of you now," she said after the glow died down. When Gabrielle and Nico were finally able to breathe, their hands were intertwined. Harry and Fleur explained to the young bonded couple that they must remain in physical contact for a total of 3 days, in order to let the bond settle before they entered the next stage. Harry could only imagine how Hades was going to react to this. They escorted the newly bonded couple alongside a group of shell-shocked demigods and satyr into the hunter goddess's tent. Upon entering and sitting down before the goddess who sat on her forested throne with a wolf at her foot and Zoe on her right, Grover knelt and began to worship the moon goddess until Talia had to pull him back. "So, she did join?" Harry asked with a somewhat pained smirk, knowing this had the potential to hurt young Nico. Yes, was Artemis' answer. Zoe tells me you know of their godly parent, and intend to take Nico as your apprentice? Harry nodded. Very well, so be it. But I will need your help to explain their origins as well as to train them in whatever gifts their father allows them to have, she stated as a matter of fact. Harry bowed his head and did not object. Wait, so you know what we are? Nico asked, perplexed. Harry then stood in front of and knelt to Nico's side. Nico, you know that card game in your pocket, the ones that speak of gods and goddesses? Nico nodded, confused. Well, the thing is, the gods of Olympus are real. The young lady before us, on the throne, is Lady Artemis, goddess of the moon, hunt, childbirth, and other things. The girls who follow her are her hunters, which your sister has joined. Normally, this means you wouldn't be seeing her for a long time, only because you would be going to a special camp called Camp Half-Blood. It's a camp for demigods, like you, me, and the others there. He pointed at Annabeth, Percy, Talia, and Bianca. Your father has charged you to be my apprentice, and since we are distant cousins on your father's side, you'll be able to see your sister much more than you normally would, because, now you won't be going to Camp Half-Blood. You will be staying with me. I will teach you to hunt, fight, and survive in this new world that you are in. And Bianca will be around when my mother allows in order to understand what gifts you've inherited from your father, and how to use them. Would you be okay with that? Nico seemed to have taken it all in stride for a few moments before he used his free hand to hug Harry's neck, which Harry returned. Of course Gabrielle joined in the hug, much to Fleur's delight as she snapped off a picture for later blackmail material. Harry just playfully growled at her while separating from the newly bonded kids. Artemis, sensing the change in Gabrielle and her now being bonded with young Nico, could only sigh, as no doubt Nico would pick on the archery skills Gabrielle learned from her hunters. Oh well, no use crying over spilled milk, she thought to herself. Artemis smiled at her son and his maturity as he smiled back at her when he turned back to her, sensing her eyes on him. He then decided to take Nico and show him one of the things he enjoyed doing when among the hunters and Artemis, as he taught young Nico through observation, how to cook a big dinner, fit for an entire army. Harry, later in the night, had some Potter elves he summoned to put up his magical tent, and had them show the demigods, Satyr, and Nico into it. Nico of course hooted out loud, "I love magic," causing a few giggles before heading to bed to sleep, with Gabrielle in front of him. Harry and Fleur watched as an exhausted Nico pulled Gabrielle into his arms, both holding tightly to each other, as they both passed out. Harry found the others already passed out in their rooms and decided to speak and catch up with Artemis before he turned in. They spoke to each other well into the night, until he realized how tired both of them were as he hugged and kissed his mother goodnight and joined his own bonded wife in Morpheus's sweet embrace. The next day, after the tents were packed, Artemis and Harry assured everyone that dawn was approaching despite it still being dark and cold. A warming charm from Harry and Fleur fixed the chill bit on everyone. On the hill, Westover Hall's windows were completely lightless. Harry observed as Talia, Grover, and Annabeth had huddled together. Moments ago, Artemis had learned from one of Harry's contacts of a monster that Luke was searching for. Artemis explained how the hunters would go to Camp Half-Blood as soon as Apollo showed up. Percy heard that last bit of news as he passed by mother and son and informed the others, who could only groan. He noticed Talia and Zoe giving each other the evil eye a second later. There was a lot of murmuring from the small group, as Talia was no doubt complaining about how Bianca was snagged by Artemis because of Zoe. Finally, the sky began to lighten. Nico stood by Harry's side in a set of clothes Harry had bought for him through a Potter elf. "About time. He's so lazy during the winter," Artemis drawled. Harry could only smirk. He's just being a bit theatrical, Mom." "Hey, whose side are you on?" she asked, with a fake shocked look in her eyes. "Yours. Just saying," Harry said, his hands in the air, shoulders shrugging. There was a sudden blast of light and warmth coming from the horizon. "Don't look," Artemis advised, "at least until he parks." Naturally, everybody did as she said, as if on instinct, as they turned away and closed their eyes. Harry felt that the necessary warming charms were no longer needed as the heat of Apollo intensified. When it subsided, they all turned back. What they all saw was a red convertible Maserati Spider. Percy, of course, was drooling at the mere sight of the car. The driver, Apollo, got out, smiling. Artie, Hair Bear, Little Flower and Gabby. The sun god called out. He had sandy blonde hair, and a look that made women swoon. He wore jeans, loafers, and a sleeveless t-shirt. Wow, Talia muttered. Apollo is hot. He is the sun god, Percy stated. That's not what she meant, Pinecone Head. Annabeth slurred. Little sister, Apollo called. His teeth shining brightly. What's up? You never call, never write. I was getting worried. Artemis sighed. I'm fine, Apollo, and I am not your little sister. Hey, I was born first. We're twins, she growled. How many millennia do we have to argue? Mom. Harry interrupted. He's just picking. Sometimes, you two remind me of Bud Abbott and Lou Costello. Harry said humorously with a shake of his head as Artemis and Apollo looked at each other and only chuckled at the same time despite the fact that her son compared her and her brother to a long-dead set of comedians. Artemis lightly smacked her son in the back of the head for daring to compare her and her brother to the legendary comedians. So, what's up, sis? The sun god asked once he and Artemis composed himself. Even Zoe had a hard time not laughing. Got the girls with you, I see. We need a lift to Camp Half-Blood, Uncle. Harry answered, rubbing the back of his now sore head. That I can do, Bud. He said with a pointed finger at his nephew with a click of his tongue and a wink. I feel a haiku coming on. The hunters, Harry, Fleur, and Artemis all groaned, lowering their heads. As much as Harry and Artemis loved Apollo, they and Fleur had heard his haikus before and all agreed he needed lessons on his haikus, where his rhyming was concerned. They of course ignored his attempt at another haiku as he began and finished it, though he was none the wiser of this. He also didn't notice Harry secretly pass a set of miniature earplugs to his wife while the goddess and her hunters discreetly plugged their ears with the magical earplugs. They were charmed with glamour charms so Apollo wouldn't notice them putting them in or taking them out once he was finished with said haiku. They all wore innocent looks and acted normally so he couldn't tell whether they heard him or not. That last line was only 4 syllables. Artemis said as she raised 4 fingers. Over the long life she has lived, she and her hunters took the time to learn to read people's lips. Apollo frowned. Was it? He asked, scratching his head, as if he didn't have a clue. Yes. What about I am so big-headed? She answered. No, that's 6 syllables. HHMMMM. He muttered to himself while in thought. Zoe turned to the others. Lord Apollo has been going through this haiku phase ever since he visited Japan. Harry and Fleur choked as they began to chuckle with a set of nods. 'Tis not as bad as the time he visited Limerick. If I'd had to hear one more poem that started with, there once was a goddess from Sparta. I've got it, Apollo announced suddenly. I am so awesome. That's 5 syllables. He bowed, looking very pleased with himself. And now, sis, transportation for the hunters, my bestest pal and nephew, his wife, little Gabby, and her new boyfriend, you say. Good timing. I was just about ready to roll. These demigods will also need a ride. Artemis said as she pointed to Percy, Talia, Annabeth, and Grover. Some of Chiron's campers. No problem. Apollo acknowledged as he looked at the ones Artemis referred to. Let's see, Talia, right? I've heard all about you. Talia blushed. Hi, Lord Apollo. Oh, please. Annabeth muttered as she rolled her eyes. Ahem, Uncle, you do know she is your half-sister, right? Harry called out. That made Talia look up in realization and pale in horror and then turn green as if she was going to spew. The sun god took a moment to also realize what his nephew was saying, as he too paled and nodded, taking a step back. Why yeah, that's right. Zeus's girl. Glad you're back. I hate it when pretty girls turn into trees. Man, I remember this one time. Brother, Artemis called out to stop before too much information was revealed of Apollo's life. She rubbed the sides of her head to try and stave off an incoming headache. You should get going. Oh, right. His eyes then landed on the son of the sea god, narrowing. Percy Jackson. Yeah, I mean. Yes, sir. Apollo eyed him for a moment before he snapped out of whatever was going through his head. Well, we'd better load up, huh? Ride only goes one way. West. And if you miss it, you miss it. Nico was admiring the Maserati as he said out loud, nice car. Thanks, kid. Apollo responded back. But how will we all fit inside that? The son of Hades asked, pointing at the car. Turning to said car, Apollo smacked himself in the side of the head. Well, duh. Yeah, I hate to change out of sports car mode, but I suppose. He sighed. He took out his car keys and beeped the security alarm button. Chirp chirp. For a moment, the car glowed brightly again. When the glare died, the Maserati had been transfigured into a turtle-top shuttle bus. Right, everybody in, Apollo said. Zoe ordered the hunters to start loading. She picked up her camping pack as Apollo stepped forward with a sly smile, arms and hands out as if to help. Here, sweetheart. Let me get that. The lieutenant of Artemis recoiled, her eyes flashing murderously. He stopped and took a step back with his hands up as Artemis hollered out. Harry rolled his eyes as he knew his uncle couldn't pass up the chance to try and get physically close to the hunters. Brother. She chided. You do not help my hunters. You do not touch, look at, talk to, or flirt with my hunters. And you do not call them sweetheart. Sheepishly, and a few feet away next to Harry and Fleur, who snickered, he said, Sorry, I forgot. By the by, where are you headed off to anyway, sis? Hunting, she answered. And it's none of your business. I'll find out. I see all, know all, he said as he swung his finger around as to demonstrate his point. Artemis snorted. Just drop them off, Apollo, and no messing around. I never mess around, he cried out in mock indignation. Rolling her eyes, Artemis looked at her group of hunters and her son as well as her brother. I will see you all by the winter solstice. Harry and Zoe is in charge of the hunters. Do well, and do as I would do. You sure you don't any want some company, Mom? Harry asked as Zoe straightened and acknowledged Artemis' command with a nod. No, you have a responsibility of watching over and aiding your sisters and Zoe in helping her in Bianca and Nico's training while you are to inform dear Uncle Hades about his son and daughter's new situation. Harry winced and looked down for a moment before his head bobbed up and down several times, showing he understood her wishes, even if he didn't like it. She and he both stepped up and embraced one another for the last time for some time. Be careful, okay? I can't lose you, he whispered into her ear. She smiled and held him at arm's length. And you won't, I promise. I'll keep an open mental link to you and your sisters, just in case. Caressing his right cheek, she lowered and kissed his forehead and did the same for Zoe. Stepping back, she sighed, steeled herself, and knelt and touched the ground as if looking for tracks. When she rose, she looked troubled. So much danger. The beast must be found. She then sprinted towards the woods and melted into the snow and shadows. Apollo, who watched his sister disappear into the shadows of the woods, turned and grinned, jangling the car keys on his finger. So, he said, who wants to drive? Summoning the keys to his hand, Harry smirked, slid on a pair of conjured dark shades and in his best Arnold Schwarzenegger voice, said I'll drive. Apollo could only smile widely, liking his nephew's positive attitude already unlike his sister's. The hunters and demigods piled into the bus. The huntresses piled into the back to be as far away from Apollo as possible, with Bianca joining them. Harry had spoken to Zoe about allowing Nico and Gabrielle to sit near the huntresses to be as close to Bianca as possible in order to keep their sibling bond strong. Fleur kissed her husband's cheek in thanks for his thoughtfulness. He smiled warmly at her as Apollo sat on his right while she sat directly behind him. Annabeth came up to them as Percy, Talia, and Grover sat behind Apollo. You know how to drive this thing? She asked. Her longtime friend turned back and smirked. Trust me. Sure thing. Ernould. She slurred with more than a hint of sarcasm while she wore a smirk as she turned to head back to her seat. Fleur giggled with her mouth hidden behind her hand. Almost an hour later and the bus touched down outside the boundary tree line where Talia's tree still stood. To Harry, seeing Talia outside of her tree form was a good thing. He'd envisioned a chance to meet and get to know his cousin once upon a time. Now that she was free, alive, and healthy, but also a girl with attitude and a goth. Stepping out of the bus with Fleur behind him, followed by Nico with Gabrielle, the latter who was jumping up and down at having flown in the air while inside the bus, their hands still intertwined. Not bad, nephew. Not bad at all. All right, everybody out. I got things to do, places to be. Apollo said, patting Harry on the back and admiring the smoothness of the ride under Harry's handling. Looking around the area, The bus itself had melted the snow that covered the ground that also touched outside the encampment, but had left the inside of the camp untouched. The trip may have short, but the entire time there had been a lot of whooping and hollering as Harry took the wheel, and with the speed the bus had accelerated it, to the hunters and even the demigods and Grover, it'd been like riding a high-rolling, fast-moving roller coaster. There was many an arms-raising, hooting, and hollering. But altogether, it was a very fun ride. "Harry, come here," Apollo said while gesturing with an index finger. Stepping up to his uncle, "Listen, I love my sister, so I know there's a slight chance she's going to get captured, and if she is, I'm going after her, and the one who touches her will die slowly and very painfully," Harry said with a determined gleam in his eyes. Apollo looked at his nephew for a few moments before he smirked and lightly smacked his nephew in a positive gesture and nodded. "Take care of those kids, all right?" Harry nodded as he and the sun god bumped fists and parted ways as he spoke with Talia and Percy for a bit before turning the bus back into a Maserati and flew off into the sky after takeoff. Turning back to the entrance of the camp, the group entered while Harry, Zoe, and Fleur remained behind to ensure no unwanted guests or monsters attempted to attack. When the last of the combined groups walked through the wards, they followed through as well. It was then that Chiron in his centaur form trudging up to the new arrivals. "Zoe, Harry, hunters, welcome. And whom might these young ones in front of you be, and why do two of them feel like Vila?" "Well, Chiron, I'd like you to meet my wife Fleur Potter Delacour and her sister Gabrielle, soon to be D'Angelo, as she and young Nico here have begun a bonding process." "Bonding? As in?" "Yes, Gabrielle's Vila-inherited magic has found its perfect match in young Nico here. In other words, a soul bond." Nico's face began to turn red while Gabrielle slapped Harry's arm and hid her blushing face in Nico's chest as he wrapped his arms around her. "And this taller, yet elder female copy of him is his sister Bianca," he said as he placed a hand on one of her shoulders. "Guys, this is Chiron, trainer of heroes," Harry said, stepping forward. Fleur stepped forward and curtsied before the legendary centaur, who returned the curtsy in respect. "Wife?" The elder immortal chuckled. "You don't do things by half, do you, Harry?" Harry smiled and rubbed his neck sheepishly as Fleur took one of his arms in her own. "As said nosing but good zings about you, Lord Chiron," Fleur said. "Please, child, or Mrs. Potter, but it's only Chiron. Do make yourselves at home. For you and the hunters, Artemis's cabin is welcome. Actually, due to Nico and Gabrielle's unique situation, I'm going to use my magical tent for them and Fleur and myself, while Zoe and the girls uses my mother's cabin. Besides, I have to report to his and Bianca's father. Zoe, can you help Fleur? I'm undoubtedly going to be a while in the underworld." "Father, underworld? So their father is?" Chiron asked with a minor wince as Zoe nodded. "Yeah. Grandfather Hades." It was then two symbols appeared over the heads of the D'Angelo siblings' heads, showing their father's claiming of them through his symbol of power, as the helm of darkness flashed over their heads, with another set of symbols flashing overhead of Fleur and Gabrielle in the form of a dove with a branch sprouting leaves in its beak that was pink and had a scent to it that smelled oddly of perfume. Everyone followed Chiron's example as he knelt on one leg with his head bowed. "It is determined. God of the underworld, the dead, subterranean regions, and riches. Hail Bianca and Nico D'Angelo, son and daughter of Hades. Goddess of love and beauty. Hail Fleur Potter Delacour and Gabrielle D'Angelo Delacour, legacies of Aphrodite and granddaughters of the current queen of the Vila nation of France." There were squeals of joy from a group of girls with a small percentage of boys as they clambered to get near the Vilas as they and everyone else rose. The sisters looked to Harry, who shrugged. Gabrielle instead stuck to Nico, who wrapped an arm around her protectively, as she wasn't used to the attention her Vila allure was attracting outside of her own nation now that she had found her mate, and definitely not around so many male demigods, especially the sons of Ares. Harry and Fleur stood in front of the young teens in order to remove the unwanted attention. Harry palmed his bow after quickly notching an arrow, looking at all the males within the camp with narrowed eyes, and shook his head, giving them all the universal language of off-limits to them all as Fleur narrowed her eyes as she pulled out several daggers that she held tightly in the crook between each finger in her right hand, while she had to clamp down her occlumency in order to ensure her allure didn't affect the males around her within the camp. "Percy," Harry called out. The son of Poseidon turned to and stepped up to Harry. "Yeah, Harry? Listen, I got some things I need to take care of real quick." Do you think you can Zoe help keep an eye on Fleur and Gabby as they and Zoe pitch my tent next to my mother's cabin and get Nico and Gabby situated while protecting them? See if Talia and Annie is up to helping. Tell Clarice if you see her, that I'll get her another pet from a friend of mine if she can keep her brothers and the other sons of the gods in line. If you're up to it, I can do the same for all of you guys when I get back. Where are you going? Percy queried. To Hades, was Harry's simple answer with a sigh. Fleur, be safe and enjoy time with your cousins if you want. I'll be back by dinner, okay? He surmised as he kissed her long and hard, getting many a hoots and whistles from the others as Fleur raised a foot off the ground. Don't be too long, US band. Avenue Somezin special I want to show you tonight, she suggested with a whisper in his ear that she nipped with her teeth, successfully feeling Harry shiver in ecstasy. Well, when you say something like that, how can I say no? He laughed. When they parted, he ruffled Nico's hair and kissed Gabrielle's brow, and fist-bumped with Zoe and Phoebe. He then disappeared in a torrent of flame. Appearing within the throne room of his grandfather's kingdom, he was surprised to see his grandfather going over some paperwork, who then rose his head at sensing Harry's arrival. Harry, so good to see you. Grandfather. Harry acknowledged with a nod. How's Nico and Bianca settling in at the camp? He asked as he vanished the paperwork when Harry conjured from flames in his hand 2 bottles of cola, and passing one to his grandfather who opened his and took a long satisfying gulp. Harry also conjured a chair from thin air and sat down in front of the Lord of the Underworld. They are well. Mother has learned of a beast that needs putting down and has began hunting for it, and your son has bonded to a vila while your daughter has joined mother's hunt as you predicted. Hades spat out the mouthful of soda he had in his mouth and began coughing only to then begin laughing. Avila? Avila? Ha 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 ha. Which one was it? He asked hysterically in a positive-toned query. Harry rubbed the back of his head sheepishly, sighing again as he answered, young Gabby, my sister-in-law. Somehow, her vila heritage has recognized Nico as the perfect mate. I expect her body, personality, and psyche will change somewhat to be on par with Nico as his will do the same. Hades just laughed harder at this and began to slap his knee. My little boy is growing up and already married by the laws of magic. I'm so proud, he said, wiping a stray tear from one of his eyes. It's going to take some time before either of them are physically able to be ready to complete the bonding process as their now shared magic and demigod course compensate and matures. The many times over grandson of Hades explains. The Lord of the Underworld nods in understanding after getting himself under control. So, I may become a grandfather again soon. Well, I don't know about that, Harry said until the god stopped him with a raised hand. Trust me, Harry. I know how these things work. I have been around for a long time after all. True. But if it comes to that, he left that thought hanging while Hades nodded again, coming to the same thought. You should know that both Dumbledore as well as Riddle and all of his cronies have been brought into my domain and are being punished in the most excruciating punishments Electo and my Furies can think of. What of young Draco Malfoy? As far as I know, he still lives and has already been transferred to Camp Half-Blood. His only crime was observing his father and not knowing any better. His father wanted a copy of himself, and even Narcissa Malfoy herself allowed it to come to pass as she had given up all hope that he wouldn't become like his father. Should he enter my domain anytime soon, he'll be sent back to be reborn only because he was brainwashed and didn't know any better, but he won't be able to remember his past life. I second that idea, though it's more than he deserves, Harry said. Indeed. Hades agreed. Listen, I was wondering. Nico and Bianca don't necessarily have human parents anymore. I know their mother must have meant a lot to you in order to have 2 children with her, and they found themselves somewhat close to my father and the Marauders when we got them out of that castle, or at least Nico did, and I was wondering that should they need a place to call home outside of the camp, well. You were wondering if your parents could take them in if they ever needed a place to feel normal and human? Without speaking, Harry looked down and nodded. Hades smiled as he stared at his many times over grandchild. You have no idea how proud of you I am and how much I thank the fates every day for you coming into mine and your other grandfather's life, bridging the gap between our world and Hecate's after so many centuries apart. Should James and Lily wish to add Nico and or Bianca to the Potter family, I would welcome it. You are everything we, the gods, should strive to emulate, my child. Just because we can be a selfish and cold lot, doesn't mean we do not have hearts or cannot learn to better ourselves. Artemis is lucky to have you as her son. I am proud to be the bridge between our worlds, grandfather. I am proud that you and the other gods and goddesses of Olympus have given me a purpose, so much so, that I no longer blame my parents for the wrongdoings done to me because of an old monk's manipulations. Hades nodded, knowing Harry had finally forgiven his parents, which was for the better. Both individuals spoke for a bit more about life and the training both Bianca and Nico would be undergoing before Harry realized it was time to head back. Grasping and shaking his grandfather's hand with a promise to visit later on down the road with Hades wishing him and the family well, Harry smiled one last time and then disappeared into another pillar of flame again and reappeared before and as the entire camp prepared for dinner. After offering an entire plate of food to his many Olympian patrons, but none more so except for Artemis and the hidden in plain sight Hestia herself who smiled warmly to her champion, Harry filled his plate again and sat with his wife and kin at Artemis' table. Kissing her cheek as she leaned into him, he sat, "So, what did I miss?" Zoe, Fleur, and Gabby spoke of how after the D'Angelos being revealed as Hades' children, they were the target of many negative comments and whatnot from Mr. D. Who couldn't keep his eyes off of either Fleur and or Gabby, and neither could the other young men throughout the camp. The only reason no one made any attempts was because of not just the hunters of Artemis, but also because of Percy, Talia, and Annabeth guarding them. With Harry there, they were all more than sure that no one would get stupid and cross them or the hunters. Harry was more than known for his gentleness, but with his powers and skills, should he need to be, he could be deadly as a government assassin, if not, better than any known government assassin. Later in the night before bedtime, the Delacour sisters and Harry sent Iris messages to their respective families and updated them, as well as giving the head of the Delacour family the news of the newest member of his family, as well as Harry running his idea by his biological parents about adopting Nico and Bianca, to which they agreed to speak to the siblings together as a family. Harry allowed them to speak to James and Lily Potter, who let them also see the other Potter children and explained that should they ever want to come to Europe and be a family, they'd be welcome. Harry had a little bit of time to speak to his twin, who looked past Harry's shoulder to see what he could of Camp Half-Blood. Harry looked behind himself to see what his brother was looking at, then turned to look. "You want to see this place from the inside, Charlie? Do you think they'll let me? Good chance. Listen, Mum, Dad, Nico and Bianca needs a mortal family in case something happens. They need stability outside of this life. They also need a new name. I was wondering if you'd be willing to adopt 2 extra kids in the off chance of something happening." "Yeah, of course, Harry. You know we will," Lily Potter said. "Mum, Dad, listen. Something is going down. It's something big. We need to get the alliance set and prepped. If Luke succeeds and Kronos rises, many innocent mortals, non-blessed, half-bloods, wizards, witches, it doesn't matter. We have to make sure that when it happens, that we stop Kronos from whatever his plans are." "We'll be ready, Harry. Count on it," James said, sparing a look of conviction. "I love you guys. You know that, right? Harry, don't do that. Please," Lily said with trembling lips as she covered her mouth with a hand. "If in the long run." "Ari, what are you doing?" Fleur asked, turning to him. "Ensuring your safety in case this all goes pear-shaped," he answered. "I'm willing to die for you, my family, for everybody, so long as Kronos is finished." She slapped him, hard. She then went to her room and slammed the door. "Harry, you better go to her and talk to her. We'll be here when next you call," James said as Lily led Charlie out of visual range. Harry nodded and ended the Iris message with a wave of his hand. Rubbing his cheek, he walked up to and opened the bedroom door. It was going to be a long night. Thanks for watching.